God of War Ragnarok is, of course, steeped in Norse mythology. Now, characters like Thor, Atreus, Odin, and many others are all within the expansive world of the video game series. Now, what fascinates me about the God of War franchise is its unique take on Norse mythology and some of the depictions of the gods therein. Now, throughout its history, the God of War franchise has subverted the mythology of different cultures in a way that we've never seen done with such attention to detail related to the source material. Now, bringing gods like Thor and Kratos' son Atreus, aka Loki, into the God of War pantheon are ones I think are well worth highlighting to explore how they in particular have been depicted throughout movies, television shows, and games. Because quite honestly, let's face it, the God of War video game series has done it way better than most, including Marvel.
Noob Master, hey, it's Thor again. You know, the God of Thunder? Oh, that's right. Yes, go cry to your father, you little weasel.
Oh, and for the sake of this particular video, unless otherwise noted, any mention of Ragnarok is in reference to the upcoming God of War game. Not the mythological event, the MCU movie, the Netflix show, the anime, or any of the heavy metal bands, albums, or songs who borrowed that particular name. Because this can get confusing.
The prophecies say Fimbulwinter leads to Ragnarok. War is coming.
I mentioned Marvel off top because, you know what, let's face it, when the majority of people think of figures like Thor or Loki, they almost immediately think of Marvel's depictions of each in the MCU. Now, I personally was never a fan of how Marvel depicts Norse gods because I never think of divine beings as superheroes from another world. Although I guess Asgard is technically another world, and director Taika Waititi had this to say.
They're aliens, mate. Look at them. They're aliens. They're space aliens. They're space Vikings.
Okay, well, you know what? You can choose to believe that if you will, but I digress. Now let's focus on the appearances. Now in Marvel Comics, Marvel movies, etc., Thor's aesthetic is muscular, tall, with long flowing blonde hair. Now taking a look at God of War Ragnarok, Thor's appearance is wider, bearded with red hair, and with a bit of a belly. Now, it gave off Marvel's Fat Thor vibes when we first saw his reveal, which is the only similarity between the two depictions.
Wait, don't it look all right?
You look like melted ice cream.
That and the fact that he wields a hammer, although that changed later on in the MCU with Thor's use of Stormbreaker. Now, throwing a little bit more weight behind it, pun intended, Thor's hefty appearance in the MCU at this particular point was due to him feeling depressed, blaming himself for that now infamous moment.
You should have gone for the head.
God of War's depiction of Thor is fat because, well, that's how he was built, based on his godly genetics. Now, Thor of mythology is described as having red hair with a beard, and beards in Norse culture were indicative of masculinity. Now, you take a look at most Vikings, the majority were represented with long beards, so you can see that particular notion. Now, Thor's physical appearance in God of War Ragnarok is far more accurate to the mythos and is rather fitting for the world created in the God of War video games. Now, while I've never been a big fan of how mythological figures are depicted in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I still applaud their inclusion. Yes, because in some instances, the MCU has managed to acknowledge a few elements from the source material. Loki, for example, was an amazing Disney Plus series where we were introduced to different variants of Loki.
Hello.
Now, in Norse mythology, Loki's shape-shifting abilities render him quite malleable, meaning he can take various different forms. And we see this in the Disney Plus series, with Alligator Loki being one of my personal favorite variants. I loved him. Now, Loki within the God of War franchise has yet to rear his head, at least by that particular name. Now, Atreus' mother wanted to name him Loki, which means Atreus is likely the God of War Ragnarok incarnation of the Norse god and will likely be explored in depth in the upcoming game. Now, as to whether or not the MCU's depiction of Loki is superior to that of God of War's remains to be seen, at least until the video game is released. Now, Ragnarok's setting taking place during the ancient times of Scandinavia is what makes Ragnarok feel more accurate than the MCU's placement of these Norse gods in modern times, in our world. But what kind of vibe do you really get when you take a character out of the days of yore and place them within a more futuristic setting? Like, does it even feel the same? From the beautiful Scandinavian backgrounds to the relentless, brutal Valkyrie, God of War really immerses you in ancient mythological times. Like, Thor's appearance is so fitting in this environment, but what would happen if he were transported 2,000 years into the future, had cybernetic parts, and lived in a futuristic world based on Norse mythology? Like, how accurate would his depiction be, and what would you call it? Well, you'd call it too human. Like, why take these mythological beings and place them in a futuristic setting? Like, I always question the displacement of these divine beings, but then I guess I have to remind myself that it's just a creative choice. So is Sony Santa Monica's creative direction with Ragnarok. And with it, it feels like a stronger representation of Norse mythology, giving the gods represented therein a more accurate aesthetic. God of War Ragnarok's Thor definitely trumps any other 3D appearance of the character, including all the countless Marvel video games. But what about his other non-Marvel 2D variants? Thor has appeared in anime like Record of Ragnarok, possibly sporting the largest Mjolnir anyone has ever seen. He's also made his appearance in DC, both in the Sandman and Wonder Woman line of comics. Now, each of these representations of Thor hold close to the source material and yet differ vastly from one another. Like, for example, Record of Ragnarok's depiction of Thor has Thor with a sleek, muscular build, red hair, but with a beating frickin' heart located within his hammer that can grow to an exaggerated size. You know, you can always count on anime to make everything over the top. And taking a look at DC Comics' depiction of Thor, it seems they took close note to the Norse mythology, similar to Santa Monica Studios. Now, while these depictions in the DC pages and displayed in the aforementioned Netflix anime were great, it seems Thor is primed to really set things off more than these variations have when he takes up arms against Kratos in Ragnarok. Now, after all, we're entering Norse mythology's version of End of Times here with Ragnarok. Now, this is essentially hell on earth, and Kratos will undoubtedly have to answer for his actions stemming from the previous game. And with it, we're getting what I believe to be the most creative take on Norse mythology we've seen across any form of media. Now, what started off as a mere revenge story against the God of War has transformed into a father-son tale of survival and keeping one's tormented past a secret in order to find some semblance of normalcy. But of course, the gods talk. You know, they're up there talking, and ain't no way those deities weren't aware of a god-killing guy roaming around in the land of the mortals. They were aware of you, Kratos. Come on, you can't hide forever.
I do not need you to protect me.
Anyways, Santa Monica's ability to remain accurate to the source material while infusing it with its unique and creative take is something special, and honestly, I gotta say, it's a sight to behold. Now, taking a look at all these other representations of both Norse gods and mythology from other creative sources should give you a better appreciation of what Santa Monica Studios is doing and has been doing with the God of War franchise. The accuracy and attention to detail from what we've seen so far is stunning and should get anyone, and I mean anyone who has been a fan of the franchise since its humble beginnings, hyped to help Kratos as he continues to eradicate every single freaking god he encounters. Now, we'll see if Thor is a formidable foe and if he survives God of War's version of the endgame. Thankfully, we won't have to wait too long.
To me, it's one of the neatest things they did was decide to go in a different direction with portraying Thor. So I almost feel like Thor's about to ask me if I even lived, bro. My name is Jackson Crawford. I'm a specialist in the Old Norse language and Old Norse mythology, previously teaching at UCLA, UC Berkeley, and the University of Colorado Boulder, and now a full-time public educator using YouTube and my books and other means of spreading good information about these subjects that are so popular, but often subject to a lot of misinformation in the wider world. There are so many modern interpretations and retellings of these stories And so often those interpretations and retellings are layered on top of one another. So you get so-and-so's take on this, which is influenced by so-and-so's take, which is influenced by so-and-so's take. I think if it looked too much like Marvel's Thor, it would almost be a shame. To me, it's one of the neatest things they did was decide to go in a different direction with portraying Thor. So, you know, I've seen guys who lift who look like that. Yeah, I'm not going to object to that, but to me is kind of a fun, different spin they're putting on it. But one thing I'll point out is that never in our medieval written sources do we get a comprehensive description of what any of the gods look like. The closest we get is with Odin, because Odin shows up in so many sagas of human heroes that sometimes he's described as this old man leaning on a staff with one eye, long gray hair, usually wearing blue or gray, usually with his face covered in some way by a big hat or by a cloak. So Odin is sort of described. But the other gods, at best, we get their hair color, right? And that's what we get with Thor, is he's red-haired. And that is all I could really tell you, except that I would expect him to look strong. And here he does look strong, right? I mean, the belly doesn't detract from that. And in fact, I think that it kind of makes him look more like the guys who would really ask me, do you even lift, bro? But I think also very often our depictions in popular culture of these gods lean on one another so that it would be almost a cop-out for him to look too much like, say, the Marvel Thor, because it's leaning so much on how Marvel interprets his character. I think to give a completely different spin on it and have him look rougher around the edges, a little bit more like a real-life gym rat maybe, is an interesting and compelling new take, and it doesn't contradict anything in our sources. So I think that it's kind of cool.
We have been feverishly waiting for this epic journey of a father and son to draw to its conclusion since we commenced the Norse chapter of Kratos in 2018. Now that winter is coming, things are about to heat up. Cross-generation remains in Ragnarok, but is this going to be a winter of discontent for PlayStation 4 and Pro owners? With this second serving of the Daddy Simulator upon us, we have a new generation of console entered into the mix. The PlayStation 5 is significantly more powerful than the PS4 and Pro versions of consoles, and the modes and outputs here reflect that, as right from loading, you are asked what mode do you want to enjoy this at. From the highest pixel quality to the latest 120 FPS frame rates, you have some big choices to make. And there are some big leaps over last generation. Starting with the PlayStation 5 first, we have two core modes, Favor Resolution and Favor Performance. There's a third toggle in terms of high frame rate mode, which I'll touch on in a moment. Favor Resolution targets a native 3840 by 2160 at 30 FPS on a 60Hz screen, and this is the clearest, sharpest version to play. Favor Performance now takes that same 4K output from the resolution mode, with some caveats give or take, and now targets a dynamic 4K but at 60 FPS as a ceiling. But by turning on that high frame rate mode with a 120Hz screen, the resolution mode now dynamically scales to 1800p but targets 40 FPS, and that performance mode is fixed at 1440p with potentially reaching 120. The options here are excellent, and they really improve the performance, the input times and the response of a game that plays as well as this. The Pro is similar with two modes. Both use DRS, with the resolution scaling between 1440p to 1656p, again with that TAA pass, and the performance drops the base down to 1080p now, still scaling back to 1656, but it can frequently be at 1080p. Finally, the PS4 rounds all of these up with the same 1920 by 1080p at 30 FPS, and this gives you many options to play this incredible title. The choice and effort to ensure each platform is utilised stands out, and I'm sure even Kratos himself is impressed, right?
No!
Nah, he was always a difficult man to please anyway. Let's start with the PlayStation 5 and its performance. Using that 120 FPS 4K quality mode, from the first few hours it manages to deliver on that promise, meaning the 30 FPS is locked if you have a 60Hz screen or choose to turn off that high frame rate mode in the menu. It can have a couple of dips into the high 30s in heavier action, and even on occasion just skips into the next refresh of 33 milliseconds, but as the gap from 25 to 33 milliseconds is only 8, these are all but invisible. The game also supports VRR, and if you do have a VRR screen, it can then boost above 40 FPS, with those small spikes up and down being managed by the VRR display. I noted no issues in this mode, so if you do wish to have the best visual package and performance, this is the mode to choose. For those that don't know and want the highest frame rates, then you can go for that 120 FPS mode, which basically is the performance mode with the cap removed. This means you often fluctuate somewhere between 80 to 90 FPS in action. It feels very responsive, it feels brilliant to play and looks cracking. In fact, it's very hard after a few minutes of play to really notice the difference between both modes, and if you are after the fastest, most responsive version of the title, then this is definitely the one to choose. It can hit 120 FPS in very quiet sections, but generally it's somewhere around that 80 to 90 FPS, putting it perfectly in the ballpark of almost doubling the performance, give or take, over that quality mode. The PlayStation 4 comes in with a pretty much locked 30 FPS, a couple of dips here and there, single frame jitters from cinematics, nothing major, and Sony Santa Monica have delivered a fitting swan song to the PS4 with no performance issues to concern yourself with. And this brings us to the final console in the Pro. Using that 1656 DRS solution at 30 FPS, the performance is as good as rock solid as the PS4, and there's certainly no issues here. It even has a better IQ than the checkerboard solution of the previous title. But the 60 FPS mode certainly has some judder. Averaging somewhere between 45 to the low 50s at best means it can feel very close to the same kind of performance as previous titles on the PS3 such as God of War 3 or Ascension. It's certainly more responsive and faster than a 30 FPS lock, but do not expect a locked 60 FPS most of the time, and in heavy combat cinematics and certainly some of the denser worlds you can get quite a bit of camera judder as it skips into the next refresh of 33 milliseconds. The dynamic resolution scaling along with that TAA certainly helps the image quality, but it can often be 1080p, but performance is good if not great.
Watch your left, bro!
The core assets, the character models, materials, exceptional particle and visual effects, animation are all close to identical no matter which platform you continue your journey on. And from that perspective, the fact the base PS4, a piece of hardware over 10 years old now from a technological build perspective, still offers such incredible visual and performance levels is more than worthy of applause. Even more impressive is the fact the team have improved many areas over the original 2018 release. A big area of the game's exhaustive special effects is its heavy reliance on GPU accelerated particles. From dead bodies decaying away that use an alpha blended test that collide with particles to allow each body to dynamically and dramatically decay, this is increased in Ragnarok, with prophecy sequences amongst others having an exuberant amount of particles spawning, colliding and glowing from PS4 to PS5. The FX suite the team has access to and leverages so well provide one of the game's core visual identity pillars, and the central single shot camera system ensures you are always front and center of each blow, and it's always incredible. Being a story of gods and monsters, Kratos is a hulking anti-hero with his presence always looming but never overpowering. Again, the team managed that here with his stature being used and abused based on the story and enemies you face. The unique single camera shot system returns and always keeps you in the game, as all gameplay to cinematics are seamless back and forth, with it dynamically shifting in the midst of battle or even when you simply make your way through the world. The PBR materials are hyper-realistic again, with strong diffuse-based colours mixed with a pro-based lighting system merged with baked elements due to the game's fixed lighting model. This helps aid the team's design focus and the performance levels of the older hardware. To aid the quality and dynamic nature of the gameplay, the engine uses a mixture of shadow maps and then screen space shadows and screen spaced ambient occlusion.
So my name is Bruno Velasquez. I'm the animation director at Sony Santa Monica.
Well, I love that you have a Marvel cabinet behind you, so big fan already. Yeah, so I kind of wanted to ask about combat, and I know you work on animation, so something that I've been sort of curious about is how do you create an animation that doesn't negatively impact combat? Like, how do you balance that? Because you put a lot of flourish into your moves and stuff like that if you wanted to, but then the timing and the parries and everything might get messed up. So how do you balance all of that?
Well, definitely it all starts with a collaboration with the combat team. Essentially, we have these long history of experience combat designers that are big fans of like fighting games and heavy combat games. So they have almost like this formula of what makes a heavy hit or a quick hit feel really nice. So they almost prescribe through us almost like hit frames. Like an ideal move would be if you hit on frame 10 and then the recovery takes this X amount of frames. So we almost get like a dictation of what we got, the range of frames that we got to work with. And now at that point, the animators are able to sort of within those ranges, really, really like push the poses and do pretty much whatever we like to do to make it feel nice and make the feeling of the gameplay feel good. So it's definitely that collaboration with the combat team that allows us to push the animation, but also make it feel good.
And how do you advance combat of God of War without negatively impacting that amazing feeling that the original game had, like with timing and parries? Everything just felt so great. So how do you change it without changing it too much?
Yeah, I think this time around, the combat designers decided to just offer more options. Right, so just expand with what was already built on the 2018 game. So it's evident, like in the way that you can equip like multiple shields now, offering you more variety of how you can use defense, and sometimes in some of the shields you can use them in a very offensive manner. So just kind of like expanding the options for the player. That's kind of like a mentality of rather than trying to reinvent the combat, just they offer more options for the player. So and there's of course some other surprises down the road as you play through the game, and you'll be able to have access to more moves and more abilities. So I think it's really the focus was, let's just take what we did and expand upon it and give the player more options.
I think my favorite thing right now, I decided to play on the hardest difficulty because I'm a masochist. And I love it because it forces you to learn the combat and almost be perfect with it, or figure out ways to cheese it, But it's kind of unforgiving. You have to know what you're doing, otherwise you're just not going to make it through. I played through about 80% of the original on that difficulty. And one thing I have noticed about the sequel is that it seems like there's more finisher animations. So how do you go about designing these things where Kratos is just ripping stuff apart?
Well, I'm glad that you bring up the finishers, because that was one of the biggest pieces of feedback that we got from the previous game. The fans really hoped that there was more of those vicious finishers from Kratos. So for the first time ever in a God of War game, we were able to have weapon-specific kills. So in the previous games, you would always default back to the Blades of Chaos, or Kratos would use his hands. But this time around, if you have the axe equipped or you have the blades equipped, you're going to get a different kill. And then we added a couple of varieties for each enemy types as well. So to me, like, that was one of the biggest things that we wanted to achieve. So I'm so happy that we did it. Now, how we come up with them. I promise you, we're nice people, but definitely, like, when we bring out those ideas, a bit of the dark side comes out, and we got to get into the mind space of Kratos, right, and how he would do things. So that's pretty much how we come up with them. Just tap into Kratos' psyche.
Well, after getting hit with Bifrost a few times, I feel where Kratos is coming from. You brought up the blades, right? So. I'd be really curious to hear from you. How do you take those iconic blades and how they worked in the original games and modernize them in not only the first God of War, and then improve upon them in this one? Like, what sort of changes do you make? Just tell me a little bit about that process. Yeah, of course. I mean, I think in order to really recreate the feel of the Chaos Blades from the previous games, I mean, we have all these games to look into and draw inspiration from, right? So it really is kind of going back and looking at what worked in the past and kind of
reimagining all those things from the new camera perspective. As you can see in God of War Ragnarok, now we have a lot more of a traversal and mobility that can be used in combat as well, so that you can grapple up to ledges and pull yourself up, which adds more verticality to the combat. And that's obviously an inspiration from the previous games, right, where Kratos could do that before. We wanted to sort of like draw inspiration from those old games and see how we can bring back some of those fan favorite moves. So it's really just drawing inspiration from the past and reimagining them to how they would work on the new camera perspective and systems.
It does seem like with Ragnarok that maybe it's just me, but there seems to be a bit more of a focus on juggling and stunning as opposed to pure damage. Maybe that's just how I'm playing, but is there any truth there?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to providing options for the player, there are certain things you can equip and certain things that you can do that can either deal more damage, so to just, finish the enemy, or you can apply stun. So that you can get, and the cool thing about stun is that that's how you get to the cool finishers. So and you can actually finish enemies much faster if you stun them and then get to the finisher quicker. So again, it's offering options for the player. So yeah, some things will allow you to deal more damage, some things will allow you to deal more stun. So it'll be fun for the players to see what play style they pick and what they gravitate towards.
So for me, I think God of War has one of the best mixes of combat. The gameplay is largely the combat and puzzle solving and exploration too, but combat is very important. I'm curious, how do you mix some of the best storytelling animation with some of the best combat animations for gameplay? Like, are there different strategies that you utilize when doing like the cinematics and those sort of moments? And how do you blend that seamlessly into combat? Maybe you just talk a little bit more about that aspect.
Yeah, so we have a very talented group of animators and as well as narrative designers, and we have a dedicated narrative team that focuses on delivering, working on the cinematics, delivering the story, and of course a separate group that focuses on making the combat feel good. So I think having those kind of specialized teams focusing on those areas really helps. Now, of course, we need to make sure that they merge and they work well together. So I think a lot of the philosophy is that whereas perhaps in some of the older games there was a clear divide between like, oh, now I'm fighting and now I'm in the story. We try to approach God of War Ragnarok with the story never really ends. So you're always being told the story, even through combat, even through encounters, dialogue that happens between the characters outside of combat and the cinematics, like while you're exploring. So we just always think like, okay, the story should never really end. There shouldn't be a clear divide. So I think by having that approach, it helps us to sort of blend the two together and string them together.
Is part of that strategy having the one camera? Do you do camera switches in this one, or is it one shot?
So we continue the goal that we set out to strive for on 2018 of doing the whole game with a seamless camera, and we have done that again for God of War Ragnarok, which was very, very challenging. It takes a lot of planning and setup ahead of like shooting our cinematics and a lot of collaboration with all the teams. So like, okay, this is where this is going to happen in the level, and you're going to transition from here to here and go over there. So there's a lot of planning ahead of shooting those scenes and collaboration. But yeah, it was difficult, but I'm glad that we were able to pull it off one more time. And again, it's so that the goal of that is so that the player feels that they're going along in that journey with Kratos and Atreus, and that you never really leave their side. We wanted to achieve that for sure.
Yeah, I love that actually. God of War is one of my favorite franchises ever. In case you're curious, used to have a God of War 2 poster on my wall, like in college and stuff. But I was sort of curious, were there any challenges working with, what's the right word for it, like furry animals like wolves as opposed to bipedal characters?
Yeah, of course. It's always a challenge to create characters that are not humanoid characters. Like that's always more challenging. We did have a one enemy type last game that was like a wolf. It was like one of the smaller enemies. But this time around, in this game in Ragnarok, we feature a lot more wolves, and as you will see once you complete the game. But this time we want to make sure that we did. Capture the essence of wolves as best as we could. So even early on in 2018, we had the team of animators go out to a place called the Wolf Connection, where we got to spend a day interacting with wolves and learning about them, how their behaviors are, how the interactions with humans are, because we wanted to make sure that in this game, since Kratos and Atreus actually ride a sled being pulled by wolves, and it's essentially they're part of their family, we want to make sure that we depicted that relationship accurately and as best as we could. But yes, of course, always a challenge to create creatures that are not bipedal, and but I am very happy that we got a lot more of them in the game, even beyond wolves, for sure.
What is, in your mind, the most important part of capturing the emotion that the actors evoke when they're playing out these scenes? Like, for you as the animator, how do you translate the data that you get from those performances into a compelling scene in a game engine?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we use the process of motion capture. We bring the actors to the stage. We do everything at once. So we capture the body, the facial expressions, the voice performance, and as well as the camera movement all at once. And I think that makes it a lot easier. So this is why we need to pre-plan our scenes very well, because it's almost like shooting a play essentially on a stage. Everybody needs to know it's like a dance cards. They need to know where to stand and where the camera is going to be. So I think because of that, because we capture everything at once, it is a little bit easier once we get all of that to get it into the game engine. However, most of the work is on the planning ahead of shooting the scenes, and that's what makes it challenging. But it's always important to try to get the actors to really drive those performances, and Chris Judge and Sonny Soljic have done a really excellent job of depicting Kratos and Atreus once again.
Were there any actors that sort of caught you off guard and surprised you with their performances?
I mean, I think all of the actors surprised me because they really brought something special for each character, and that's something that I'm really happy that we were able to expand our cast. It's much bigger than the first game, and we have a lot of really great interactions between all the different actors. They all kind of get their moment to shine with their characters, and I can't wait for people to just experience some of the performances, some of the scenes that we shot. I think I hope that the fans will enjoy them as much as they did on the previous game.
How does it work? Because you have to work really closely with the narrative team, the actors who are doing the motion capture, the combat team. You have to do all these different types of animation. Yes. So what's that collaboration process like?
Yeah, well, definitely there's different approaches. I sometimes when doing combat or doing cinematics, I have to kind of switch my brain a little bit on how we shoot things and how we approach things. But one thing that is consistent is that, especially for characters like Kratos, and we try to do this for all the characters across the board, we try to keep almost like a rule set or a Bible for each character, so that there's like do's and don'ts, right, on how they move and the way they behave, the way they stand, the way they draw their weapons, right? All that needs to be consistent. So my role is to be there on stage and make sure that is like carried across, even from the stunt performers over to Chris Judge's performance. And I collaborate with the narrative team, who are more focused on making sure that the dialogue and the performances are there, as far as like selling what needs to be sold on this particular scene. And of course, our game director Eric Williams is there to make sure that everything all comes together. But yeah, I am really focusing more on making sure that all that consistent movement gets carried across, whether it's combat or cinematics.
So for Kratos, do you just go to him constantly and say, no smiling, be angry about something?
Yeah, kind of like that, yes.
Yeah.
Puff up your chest more. Yes.
Yeah. Stand up straight. Good posture.
Exactly.
At the beginning of the game, so players are hopping into it. A player like myself played a lot of the previous God of War. How do you create a game where there's new players who've never experienced it before, where you don't want to be too hand-holdy, and there's also veterans. Like, how do you strike that balance with Ragnarok?
I mean, that's always a challenge. Of course, as every game, we always try to include some sort of tutorial at the beginning, kind of ease you into the game. But I think even in this game, we're going to have a little bit of at the beginning an option where the players can see a little recap of what happened in the previous game in case this is the first time they're playing God of War. I think what we're going for, especially with the Norse saga of games, is more of we're trying to draw people in with the story, with the relationship of Kratos and Atreus. Even though there's all these bombastic, battles and gods, and the setting is very epic. Really, in the end, we want to just create a story about a relationship between a father and the son, and hoping that is a path for people to sort of be introduced to God of War in a new way.
Yeah, for sure. So with a character like Atreus, he's smaller, he has to be really responsive to your button presses. Well, I'm to the point where we can't talk about it, but how do you animate him when you're controlling Kratos so that it looks natural? Because he doesn't really jump to anything. Everything he does seems like a normal fluid movement, as opposed to he doesn't teleport across the screen or something like that. How do you strike that balance of having him respond to an input from the player acting as the Kratos character, the Kratos?
Yeah. No. No, so I think we have the unique advantage that Atreus is primarily a ranged character, so that helps a lot, right? So he doesn't need to necessarily close the gap every time you hit the button. He can rely on his trusty bow and arrow. However, this time, we also wanted to expand his repertoire and to show him that he's more of a seasoned fighter now, that he's been training with Kratos for 3 years during Fimbulwinter. So we actually added a lot of melee moves for him as well, so that when you're near the enemy, doesn't feel like he's just only relying on his arrows. So then we have a lot of cool melee moves. He still jumps on the enemies and holds them like in 2018. And there's options there where we allow Kratos to even command him a little bit more than he did in 2018. So I think just the fact that he has both range and close-up melee, it allows us to sort of make it feel more natural that he's collaborating and helping Kratos during the fights.
Everything you've created is, of course, challenging, but was there a particular problem that you encountered that was really hard to just get exactly how you wanted it?
Oh, wow. There's so many of those. But of course, one of the biggest challenges was introducing a new vehicle like the sled wolf, right? Because we wanted to make sure that it felt very, very easy to control and very natural. We wanted to make it also fun, a fun diversion and experience, something that was different than the boat. And that's definitely worked on that particular vehicle for a very long time. But we really, really wanted to give the player, especially since we're going to be revisiting the Lake of Nine and in Midgard once again, we wanted to make it feel fresh. So this is why it was very important for us to get that sled, feeling really good and allowing the player to have this cool open space to explore. But definitely it took a while to get it to feel, a lot of play testing to get it to feel just right. And hopefully players enjoy driving it as much as we enjoy creating it.
Is there something that besides the sled, is there something that you're incredibly proud of on this one? You're like, oh wow, I'm so happy that this turned out so good.
I think there's several things that we set out to achieve at the beginning of 2018, or at the beginning of Ragnarok, I should say. And that one of them was, we want to go to all 9 realms. And we were able to achieve that, right? Because that was kind of like a promise that we sort of teased in the first game. So now you get to go to all 9 realms. Another thing is that the enemy variety is much bigger this time around. That was something that we got feedback on 2018. So now there's more bosses, there's more mini bosses, there's more enemy variety in general. And then personally for me I always wanted to get those weapon specific kills since God of War 3 back in the day. Like I always wish there was like a Cestus specific kill. So getting those in with the axe and the blades and on God of War Ragnarok, like that, to me, I'm super happy, and I hope the players enjoy seeing those finishers as much as we enjoyed creating them.
I appreciate it very much as somebody who adores the combat, right? Yeah, did you work on Ascension?
I did. Yeah, I've been working on God of War games since God of War 2 on PlayStation 2.
Oh, heck yeah.
So,
yeah. God of War 2 is pretty incredible. That's all I had, but throwing it back to you, is there anything that potentially I missed or that you want to talk about? Because this is the last game in this story, as Corey has been publicly said. So do you have any thoughts as you're about to launch this latest God of War for everybody?
Well, I just really hope that the fans enjoy playing the game. We really hope that they enjoy the conclusion of the story for the Norse saga. We hope that they enjoy the relationship between Kratos and Atreus and how it evolves and how they grow together as father and son. And I hope that the players just have fun. On November 9th, we're like super excited to hear all the feedback. And we always follow the comments from the community, and we love to hear what you think of the game, and we'll take all that feedback, and who knows, we'll put it onto whatever comes next.
Is that a hint? Is there something coming next for God of War?
Well, we'll see. Right now, we're just happy that Ragnarok is finished and that people are going to be able to enjoy it soon. That's really the thing that we're super excited about right now.
Well, I'm loving it so far. Thank you for all your work on it. The animation is superb, just like in the previous one. And
Thank you.
Ascension, I think, was the only God of War I was able to platinum.
Oh,
so,
nice.
Yeah, that one took a while. But big fan of the series. Definitely part of the reason I do what I do today. So,
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. And I'm also a big fan of you, and I follow you on YouTube and on Twitter. So, thank you for your content.
Yeah, no, I love what you guys do. So, thanks for everything.
Thank you.
About time. You think you can come here, become a daddy, get a clean slate? That ain't how it works. You're a destroyer, like me.
How do you follow up on one of the greatest video games of all time? Sony Santa Monica finds itself in a situation not dissimilar to when Francis Ford Coppola created the sequel to his mob movie masterpiece, The Godfather. Like part 2 of the Corleone story, God of War Ragnarok puts a fierce, younger member of the family directly under the microscope. In doing so, it manages to reach the heights of its predecessor, and in some ways, even tower above it. The writing, performances, and music are each exceptional, bringing this expansive Norse tapestry to life. But even as it holds your heart in one hand with its elegantly told story, it's crunching bones in the other with fantastically ferocious combat. It all binds together to forge a monumental action epic that adds yet another impressive landmark to the video game landscape.
You've already taught me discipline. I need more than that. I need answers. Answers you don't have.
Answers only your mother had.
Keeping things broad and spoiler-free, Kratos' story picks up a few years after the final revelations of 2018's God of War. The apocalyptic Ragnarok is coming, and its events circle around his son Atreus like one of Odin's ravens. Ragnarok wastes no time in stepping into the action, and after a breakneck opening battle, the first step of this new journey is to leave the frozen realm of Midgard behind and find a missing Norse god in the broader and varied universe. It may not be as tightly a told story as 2018's, but Ragnarok has much grander designs. This is a sprawling epic that always keeps things on the move without ever becoming disorientating, gluing me to the edge of my seat as it repeatedly toyed with expectations. It's an ambition regularly met by stunning execution, with a momentum that never slips as you hurtle towards its bombastic ending. This journey took me just over 28 hours with a fair few side quests completed along the way, but with plenty still left to do afterwards. Prophecy and sacrifice swirl at the story's centre, as it repeatedly prods at the concept of destiny and whether blood runs thicker than the ink that pens it. It doesn't merely offer up surface level readings of these themes. Instead, each character and their motives are given the respect they deserve by delving in deep. It's a truly special and fittingly grand conclusion of Kratos' Norse saga. Despite being laden with myth and melodrama, there's still plenty of time for welcome pockets of self-aware silliness that almost always elicit a laugh. Whether that be another bizarre dwarven contraption or the simple thrill of Kratos eating a sausage. When not eating dinner, Kratos' thunderous voice actor Christopher Judge frequently engages in smartly realised dialogue with his equally impressive castmates. Make no mistake though, this is firmly Judge's court, and one he frequently dominates. Kratos' traumatic personal history is reflected in everything from his mournful tone of voice to his appearance.
Atreus! Listen to me.
His Icarus wings are long since clipped, but his complexion is still pale, like a square of wall where a family portrait used to hang. The everlasting cycle of violence between parents and their children has long been a theme ever since the original God of War trilogy, although one that was only truly emphasised in 2018's revival. Now it's an inescapable fixture of Ragnarok, an exploration of the rawest and most human of emotions, and what happens when they are channeled through superhuman vessels. Pain leads to anger, anger leads to hate. This is the genesis of the stalking threat embodied by the incomparable force that is a grieving mother. Portrayed incredibly with a newfound fury by Danielle Bisutti, Freya is a striking presence to be reckoned with in the sequel. No longer just a helpful witch in the woods, she's given a whole new spectrum of emotional depth to play in, and Ragnarok is all the better for it. Each character is given their own moments to shine throughout. Sunny Suljic fires back regularly with the sharp teenage tongue of a brasher, more confident Atreus, and Alistair Duncan's severed head accessory Mihir continues to provide levity and exposition in abundance.
Back to smashing through things for fun and profit. Lovely.
Various newcomers to the vastly expanded cast also deliver fantastic performances, with a particular standout being Leia Hayes, radiating infectious energy from the mysterious Angerboda. The foul-mouthed Brock and skittish Sindri provide pockets of humour, as well as a lot of genuinely helpful info along the way as they play a much more central role in the story this time around. Also returning is composer Bear McCreary, whose score, like the Dwarven Smith brothers, goes hammer and tongs from the first moment to the last. There's some truly beautiful music to be heard along the journey, as well as explosions of raw orchestral power during intense fight scenes. Layered writing, impeccable acting, and stunning set design are all crucial aspects in driving God of War's filmic aspirations home, but they're also never let down by the rock-solid technical craftsmanship at work. The one continuous camera shot style of 2018's reboot returns, impressively snaking through the entirety of Ragnarok as if mimicking the world serpent Jormungandr himself.
My goodness, what a strapping physique. Capable of an astounding variety of acts of violence, I imagine.
God of War's combat has always been the flashy attraction that draws a crowd in to be wowed by its story, however, and Ragnarok continues that tradition. Kratos' blades whip around in every direction, delivering a clanking fiery pain to any face they meet. Heavy cleaves of his axe crunch into enemies, making them fold like bloodied origami. And yes, that axe still slices through the air, meatily lodging itself into anything unfortunate enough to be in its path, before being recalled to your palm with what remains one of the most satisfying button presses ever assigned to a controller. It's all unapologetically fast and undeniably glorious, harking back to the brand of frantic action in which the series was originally rooted. But even with that slight shift to old school action, Ragnarok's eyes are still drawn more to the shimmer of Nathan Drake's gold rather than Bayonetta's platinum. Cinematic spectacle takes precedence over the chaotic, bordering on cartoonish action of old. The axe feels largely similar to how you remember, and that's no bad thing with its dynamic mix of heavy attacks and ranged power. But how you wield the blades is noticeably different. There's a greater emphasis on using them to hook enemies and maneuver them around the arena, whether that be dragging them in towards you or juggling them in the air like the hottest of potatoes. They're much closer to how they felt in the original games, a nostalgic moveset with a brilliant modern edge. Both weapons have new tricks to show off too. You can Frost Awaken the axe by holding in the triangle button to power up your next attack, or mash the same button while the blades are equipped to ignite them. Even the shield is now more of an offensive tool, and different types can be bought and crafted to fit your playstyle. Runic abilities, special cooldown attacks assigned in your inventory, also return, and while there isn't the same abundance of choice this time around, each is devastatingly effective. Brutal finishes on stunned enemies are another enjoyable throwback to the God of War of old. There's noticeably a good amount of variety in the randomly chosen weapon-specific animations too. Movement is further emphasised by the way you can now grapple up from a distance using the blades and launch across gaps to dive into combat. Taller area design literally adds extra layers to battles, allowing you to leap from a ledge to deliver death from above. Combat sequences can feel akin to Doom kill boxes, as you dash and swing around elevated platforms towards your next victim in performances of acrobatic bloodshed, juggling cooldowns, Atreus' arrows, and your rage meter to efficiently and spectacularly destroy everyone sent to stop you. Each fight feels like a real occasion, as you slalom your way through ranged, parryable and unblockable attacks in order to sneak in a hit or two. Enemies can now perform powerful but interruptible attacks, signified by a blue ring above their head in addition to their regular skills. A double tap of the shield will sort these out, but get your timing wrong and you're in line for some considerable pain. There are plenty of other big additions to combat that I won't divulge so as not to ruin the sensation of discovering them yourself, but rest assured, Ragnarok has myriad more tools in its bag than God of War 2018 ever did, and is all the more enthralling for it. It all feels exceptional when in full flow, often mesmerising with its top tier action drenched in rhythmic brutality, and is quite simply the best combat I can remember playing in a game. And that just goes for the regular fights. Boss battles are of both a higher quantity and quality, including one encounter that makes the opening Stranger fight from 2018 look like a playground scuffle. It's not just the story bosses either. I fought massive alligator bastards called Dreki on more than one occasion, which were a real event to fight and more of a challenge than 2018's Trolls ever posed. It's great to see sprinklings of that old school monster mayhem thrown into the mix, which manages to successfully offset some of the more serious stretches of the story. Smart new puzzle ideas are consistently introduced, and building complexity throughout as more abilities are added to your arsenal. They're often fun and never in danger of slowing your progress to the detriment of the plot. But even so, Atreus or Mihir can't help but come in with a hint far too early and sometimes rob you of that satisfying aha moment. It's a very rare annoyance in a world where normally every last word is a joy to listen to. Armor customization has been streamlined, resulting in the removal of the slotting system for a more straightforward upgrading mechanic. Enchantments are now placed inside a separate amulet rather than spread over various pieces of gear. This division makes seeing what you have equipped easier and means you aren't lost delving into too many menus within menus. This also means you can upgrade a piece of armor and take it with you through your journey if your playstyle happens to perfectly click with a certain set, or you just love how it looks. The same goes for weaponry, which can be upgraded as well as fitted with attachments such as individually named hilts and handles, each with their own perks and bonuses. Who wouldn't want to play with the Stonecutter's knob, after all? Realms old and new are regularly a sight to behold, many looking torn from the pages of fairy tales, stocked with oversized flora and fauna. There's an extra effort to delve deeper into the mythology this time around, and as someone who's a fan of the Nordic source material, it's a real pleasure to see all of the different interpretations of creatures, people and places they inhabit brought to life in all manner of delightfully weird ways. For example, the dwarven city of Nidavellir is a welcome rural change of scenery, with its many homes and tunnels that Kratos must amusingly crawl around in. It's at the centre of the rocky realm of Svartalfheim, where waterways weave through islets littered with bubbling geysers. There's a real sense that this realm was ripped right out of the Old Norse poetic Edda's home of Iceland. Those geysers are also key to solving many of the puzzles in the region, as you freeze them to create stepping stones and manipulate machinery. Quirks like this help in making each place feel unique. Similarly, fun ideas are introduced in the returning Alfheim, such as reflective crystals that you can ricochet your axe off of to open doors, or even use to blindside unwitting opponents in combat. It's a further example of not only each realm looking distinct, but also feeling distinct to play in from one another. Every location almost feels like a puzzle box that you're gradually unlocking through a combination of brain and brawn as you make your way through it. These worlds bring with them dangerous new threats. If there are any faults to be found in 2018's revival, then modest enemy variety may well have been one of them. However, there is no such issue in Ragnarok, with its bestiary vastly expanded to accommodate all sizes and shapes of creatures. Familiar foes such as Draugr and elves have made their way across, but this time they're joined by creatures like Grimms, which, you guessed it, are pretty grim, scuttling toad people. Then there's a personal favourite, the Einherjar, Aesir warriors who harness the power of the Bifrost that makes a section of your health bar glow before removing that chunk on the next hit. There's an engaging but never unfair difficulty curve throughout as you're met with progressively greater threats.
Well, at least it's attacking someone besides us.
Side missions are sometimes spectacles in their own right. They're a great source of character development as you learn more about your friends and companions by helping them right past wrongs. Some side quests do just present a pure gameplay challenge over extra stories, however, such as hunting down powerful legendary enemies dotted across the realms of Yggdrasil's roots. There is no shortage of genuinely tough side boss encounters either. Chipping away at larger health bars is a really satisfying challenge, and remarkably well balanced against the standard quick kill nature of the majority of Ragnarok's fights. It's yet another testament to the masterful combat design on display. And yes, there are some absolutely tough as nails endgame level challenges to rival the Valkyries of 2018, but I'm gonna let you find out what those are for yourself. There's a substantial slew of collectibles to clean up as well, with Odin's ravens, puzzle chests, artifacts, and much more to find in every corner. There's a ton to be done after the main story has been brought to a close, all of it incredibly Moorish and fun to complete. Ragnarok never once rests on its laurels, throwing new ways to play at you until the very end. Despite having a seemingly endless amount to praise here, I really have barely scratched the surface of what God of War Ragnarok has to offer. I'm deliberately omitting dozens of secrets and surprises. I wouldn't dare spoil what's to come for anyone booting it up for the first time, but rest assured there are both huge story moments and fresh gameplay additions that live up to and often surpass expectations. Taken all together, much like The Godfather Part 2, God of War Ragnarok delivers not only a chapter that reaches the lofty heights of its predecessor, but leaves it impossible to imagine the series without it. An enthralling spectacle to behold, and an even more exciting one to take the reins of, God of War Ragnarok melds action and adventure together to create a new, unforgettable Norse saga. Impeccable writing, pitch-perfect performances, knockout action, it's a complete work of art from top to bottom. Reflecting its core themes, it's everything a sequel should be, respectful of its legendary lineage, but not afraid to take it to exciting new places. God of War Ragnarok is an almighty achievement, and creates a new high that makes many of its peers look positively mortal by comparison. For my full written review, check out the article on IGN.com, and for everything else God of War Ragnarok, stick with IGN.
Launch day for God of War Ragnarok is finally here, and today we'll be looking at some early portions of the game. We also have some very special guests joining us. We're very excited to be sitting down with Sony Santa Monica here on launch day to ask some questions about creating Ragnarok, and we'll get a chance to chat with the game's director, Eric Williams. Later, Ragnarok's lead combat designers will join us to discuss how the game's core mechanics have changed since God of War 2018. Now, we will be showing footage from the opening hours of the game, so consider this your spoiler warning. Now, let's kick things off by chatting with Eric Williams, Ragnarok's game director, about building a sequel to a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. Eric, how are you doing today?
Quite well. How are you?
Great. How does it feel to finally launch God of War Ragnarok?
Well, we're not quite there yet, but we're almost there.
Almost there.
Just a couple more days. But yeah, it's super exciting. The team is hyped. People are starting to come back into the office and, returning even from wherever they are in the world these days since the work from home. So it's cool to see people again. Review day was pretty special. I know the team was super hyped for that. But yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind.
Yeah, I bet. It's very exciting. So getting into it, the Aesir gods are incredibly influential in modern pop culture. How do you keep your interpretations original for those who feel they've seen all these characters before while also staying true to Norse mythology?
We back in 2018 when we started to create the factions or the differentiators between the gods, we always kind of looked at the Aesir gods as a biker gang. and like the Vanir gods is like a hippie commune, if you will. And so like their views on the world are kind of like completely split and against, each other. So that created for kind of like rich conflict for their war already, which is one of the big, backings of Norse mythology, the Vanir and the Aesir war. So, then enter Kratos, and you have a whole new thing that, dynamic that's going on with inside there. But yeah, like you said, there's, new media, like interpretations of those characters. Then there's like the prosetta. And we're somewhere on a sliding scale, depending on which character it is, between those two things, with a big, bucket of God of War paint put on top of it, because we want them to exist in our world the way that we want them to be for our story and what we're trying to tell. So, we're not blind. We look at everything, we read everything, and we figure out our own path through it. But I don't want to get into too much because then we'll spoil those characters for anyone.
Yep, yeah. Once again, we're not trying to spoil anything for anyone.
Yep.
One of the changes we saw in Ragnarok were the codex and lore entries, which were written by Kratos this time, as opposed to Atreus. Was it tricky to write for Kratos, a character he's very terse most of the time? I assume you also want to add enough info in each entry to give the player an interesting tidbit of information, correct?
Yeah, I think it was both challenging and kind of like probably freeing, for the writers. Like they get to take in his perspective a little bit more. Kratos is most definitely the most difficult character to write for. It's not everybody on the team can nail him, or if they do, it takes them a lot more revs than maybe a different character. Somebody was talking about in another interview that maybe you noticed or maybe didn't articulate when you were playing it is Kratos doesn't use contractions when he speaks, so like he's like, he doesn't use like don't, he's going to say do not. And it makes him feel very, stoic and stern and like that kind of like, old school kind of dad mentality. But also like when he speaks, like it has gravity behind it. So those are kind of little tricks that we have. Like there's like, like a rule book, if you will, certain things that will help for writing Kratos. That was applied to those journal entries. But it is cool to see those things from a different perspective. And it's one of the many ways we try to take like things that you already knew and make them feel the old stuff feeling new again. So you knew about all that from Atreus, but it's like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Like I want to read these again because it's from his point of view. So, yeah.
So Thor is a well-known character from Marvel comics and movies, but your Thor in Ragnarok is a bit different. How did you approach your Thor, and did he go through changes along the way?
Yeah, I think the big thing a lot of people weren't expecting is, I guess, the way he looks. Is the first thing we revealed to people. And a lot of people thought he was going to look like the way he did in the, dream sequence from 2018. But that's exactly what it was. It was a dream. The kid dreamt that. And the only thing he had seen of Thor was Thor in the lake, the big statue. And as you know, if you're ever going to have a statue made of yourself, it's probably going to be on your best day, not your worst day. So, Thor's best days looks-wise potentially might be beyond him, but it doesn't matter. He's grown a bit round, but he is still ever the force of nature. And I just wanted him to be this like brutish man-child. He doesn't have to worry about anything in the world. Nobody can deal with him. He has no peer, essentially. That does something to a person. You don't really have to play by any rules whatsoever, So he's, going to be that guy. I don't want to get too crass, but, he is going to drink and do what he does and make merry of everything. And I think that's a fun place for our Thor to be. But there's a lot more layers to him, again, that especially that Ryan brought out of Thor. And I can't speak highly enough of Ryan's performance. I think he was absolutely incredible as Thor.
So God of War 2018 was directed by Cory Barlog, and you took over directing duties for Ragnarok. How would you say your directing styles differ, and are there any sort of major changes that you implemented for the sequel?
Yeah, our directing styles are quite different. Cory's a creative at his heart. He's an actor, he's a writer. He's an animator, he's all those things, and I'm like more of an engineer at heart. I come from math and science backgrounds and design, and so the way we approach problem solving is different. But Cory and I have worked together for 20 years, and we've always kind of been like two sides of a coin that balance each other. So it was just kind of the role was a little flipped this time. Normally he's like in charge, and then I kind of like back him up and figure out how everything's going to work. And this time I was kind of doing all that, and then whenever I would need help with some of the creative stuff that maybe we got stuck on, I could ping him for some answers. That being said, though, the writing team is back almost 100% from the last game, and that they crushed it. So we were in good hands there, along with pretty much every other department. We didn't have too many departures, so the team was rock solid, and people were growing into their new roles as directors under me. So as far as the style goes, I'm a little bit more hands-on. Like I'll still get in there and mess around and get into the files and do stuff and check things in. And he was a lot more high level, and he would write. I didn't write too much. I just did more structure with the team. So just kind of, it was almost like 180. So that I think that was like more of a whiplash thing for the team to deal with, and be like, oh, we were used to this for 4 years now. This guy's kind of like flipped a little bit. So I tried to like maneuver a little bit closer to some of the things he did, so it wasn't so, diametrically opposed to what the team was used to. But at the same time, I had to find my own way to get things across to how we want to do them and get everybody aligned on what we were going to do. But we had a lot of processes in place at the studio that are really strong. We put together this inspiration book for every project, like very, very early. We make sure everybody gets us a good onboarding tool, and it kind of breaks down the whole game. And then we do these things called story time, where we get the entire team into a room, and then the writers will read pretty much the script, a quarter of it at a time. And it's almost like campfire tales with like two of your, coolest uncles in the world. Luckily, we got all that out of the way before the pandemic hit. So we had very, very strong alignment before the pandemic happened. And then they were just trying to like hold on to that as as much as you could, like through the new challenges of work from home.
That's super interesting. So there are a lot of moments of crawling through tight spaces in Ragnarok. Can you clarify what's actually happening there? Are they actually sort of like loading?
Like, do you want me to give the GDC talk on this?
Oh yeah, let's do that. Get into that.
Probably like 10 plus reasons why those are in games. And we're not the only game that use them, by the way. But
oh sure,
like the loading is usually the last resort. A lot of people say, oh, they're just glorified load zones, whatever. But they're there to line up shots for what's coming. There's a really good one in one of the scenes where you'll see like a monster as you're coming out, and it's like perfectly, and you're like, oh shoot, there it is, like I'm gonna get out. And you can stay there for a minute too and kind of be like, all right, like you can almost like plan your attack, like what I'm gonna do. So they're like staging like that. Sometimes they're to control the characters where they are on screen, so that if we need to go into like a kind of a canned sequence or a cinematic, so that everything lines up and is super smooth. They're for combat gating, so you can't run away from the fights. We don't want to use the old school, like what we used to call the DMC doors and the old God of Wars, where the invisible walls would just pop up and vanish. So these are kind of like a new mechanism for that. They're also good for players that have spatial recognition issues, like where they've been and where they're going. It's a lot of problems in open world games. It's like there's not enough landmarks, and you're like, where am I? Oh, and then you're turned around. It's like, oh no, that's that squeeze I just came from, and then there's just this over there. So they don't. Our game doesn't have as much backtracking issues because of that, because you're like, oh no, I know what that is. So, because cognitive load is like a big issue in games, like how much we're putting on your brain at one point in time. Let's see, what else are they used for? Companion catch up, to make sure the companion's lined up with you and they're there. Narrative, to drop off narrative sequences that we want to tie zones together. I could just go on and on and on. Like there's many, many uses for those.
That's really interesting. There are also a ton of options in the menu, including accessibility options. Did you need to adjust your gameplay design during development to account for them, or do they all get added afterwards?
Oh, it's a work in progress always. Because like as new features are coming online, they might not play with the accessibility features or vice versa. So it's this constant run on like, I think we had like 25 features, and then the feature set was like, oh, well, because we did this and we're actually going to do this new thing over here, we could pull this off now. Okay, cool, let's put that on the list. And it just kept growing and growing and growing. And more the team kept buying into it as well. They were like, oh, wow, like this will help any player, let alone like someone that really, really needs it. And so that's where I think the real benefits started to come from. And we started working with consultants in the community, and we'd have players come in with disabilities and impairments, and even people on the team, that might be colorblind or have motor function issues. They were like, wow, I can play the game a lot better now. So once you start to see the weight of all that, you're like, we just have to do this. It's just the right thing to do for video games. You want more people to play games, like this is the way to do it. And it is also just a giant initiative of first-party games. Like Naughty Dog has been a leader in that, and we wanted to make sure that our games were right up there with them. And Sucker Punch and Guerrilla and all the first-party studios that are out there. Like it's hopefully one day it'll just be baked into the hardware or whatever, so it's not even like a thing that each studio has to worry about. And I think the more that the studios push for these things, and it really becomes this concrete thing that, it's good for everyone to play these things. Now you're going to get backlash too. Some people are like, oh, these are easy mode things or whatever. It's just silly. It's just trying to start an argument for that reason. It's like, just don't turn them on. That easy.
Easy enough. So if we can keep this spoiler free, is there a story element from the first game that has a bigger impact on your journey in the second one that players might not expect?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, we kind of talked about it. I think that just the visual of Thor alone, and it's what he looked like compared to like who he is. He's much more menacing in the Ragnarok than what you saw in the clip from 2018. I think the other ones do get into a bit of spoiler territory, so I think we'll leave those for today. Good question, though. That's a real good question.
One to revisit a few weeks from now. Did you feel any pressure to live up to the memorable opening stranger fight from 2018?
I don't think pressure is the right word. I think there's just a sense here at the studio always that the first hour should be almost like worth the price of admission alone. And so we put a lot of effort into those things. And, I was a big part of that stranger fight, working with Denny and the animators and all that, like breaking it down, like all the elements that were going to be in there. And so it's almost like you're just trying to one-up yourself, but in a way that makes sense. It's not just go bigger. It's like, okay, it still needs to tell a story. Like there's a lot in that first Thor fight, if you really look at it, that's going on behind the scenes that you might be impressed about. Just much like the Baldur fight. I don't know if you know this, but the part when Kratos drops that giant stone monolith on him. If you ever look at that monolith, the art on it, you might be surprised on what's on that. And it's just on screen for a very few frames. But there's things like that inside the Thor fight as well. If you really take a look at maybe what's going on with the Tyr statue, you might be able to have a little deeper insight of what's up and what's going on.
I look forward to the breakdown of that. So in between the two games, some time has passed. How has the relationship between Kratos and Atreus evolved, and what do you imagine they've been doing in the years between the games?
Yeah, for sure. 3 years have passed. The whole 2018 game was about trying to get them to come together, and what's happened in between in Fimbulwinter is they've been working together to where they have shorthand and they're a unit now. And I think you see that right away in the cave scene where, Kratos is in there with the arrows and then the kid starts to come in with the deer and he couldn't even kill a deer. Now he's just showing up, and then Kratos is giving the arrows like, I still got you. You still need me, but he's like, well, I did this. And then they don't talk very much in that scene at all. It's, I think, about a 3-minute scene and very few words, but it just shows everything, just shows the progress that's been made. And much like you brought the strange fight from 2018, like that was a hard fight for Kratos because he hadn't fought in a long time. It was like he had ring rust, and that got knocked off real quick. But that's why it ends with him on his back and kind of limping back to the house, like he hadn't encountered that in a while. This Kratos has been training for 3 years and been training his son, so they're ready to go for whatever's going to come at him. And so you're really seeing that guy come back, but with a more tempered, mental capacity, and to show his son to be better. So that's where they kind of leap off at this point. But the kid's quite capable. He is his father's son.
Yeah, that's true. How did you approach exploration in Ragnarok, and how would you say the exploration element compares to 2018?
So 2018, we were learning what you call a wide linear game would look like and how it would operate. So we didn't know a lot. Doing Caldera was like a mystery box. And once we kind of figured that out, for this game, we were like, well, we want to have the Caldera back, but we want to change it, so we froze it. So that made like that whole level kind of flip on its head, if you will. And then each of the other exploration spaces in the other realms, we were like, okay, well, what are things that we really like or we want to revisit, or ideas maybe we didn't get to? And they just start to pop up out of there. And the main thing we wanted to do is make sure that, I hesitate to even call it side content because it's almost like disrespectful to how much effort we put into it, but it tells just as good a stories as the main story. It's just that you don't need those to know what's going on. They just further enhance characters that you already like their backstories, or they might be telling parallels that are happening in the main story, or cautionary tales, or these things that just bring the whole world together. That is you know, the suspension of disbelief is high if you participate in that stuff, even more so than what's already there in the story path. And I think that's something we were really, really aiming for. That, like, you know, we don't even have fetch quests. I don't think anybody, you know, or collect flags or these type of things. There's you can have elements of that, but if you layer all the other parts onto it, like, you know, solid combat with rewards, good storytelling, then you kind of perceive the content differently than it just being what video games do, because you have to have video game stuff. It's a video game at the end of the day, right? We want it to be the most video game it can be, while also being the most movie it can be, and then somewhere there's a overlap of those two. And I think that's what's kind of unique about our game, and why it's not an open world game.
So I replayed 2018 earlier this year, and I could say, you know, diving into Ragnarok feels very smooth. It definitely feels like a continuation. It feels like the other side of the coin. How was it difficult to balance that, trying to provide a sequel that does, you know, brings new things to the table, while also, you know, feeling like it's still that same world and game?
Yeah, it's super hard. But it was done with intention. Specifically, the first hour, most of what you play, you're like, okay, this feels familiar, and we wanted that. We didn't want it to be like this like weird knee-jerk reaction between 2018 and wouldn't it be like to your point, like, say you finished it and like literally 2 hours later you turn it on and be like, oh, this feels like a glove. Like, I know this is home, you know. And then it starts to open itself up to you, you know, and it does it in layers. Like, okay, like start with the axe and you get the blades, you know, new shield comes online, and then other things start to happen from there that are very different. And some people, you know, they want more. I don't know what to do about that. Like, it's like we were trying to tell like a continuous story that we want it to feel like chapter 1 and chapter 2. And it, for us, does that thing, you know, where you're like, oh yeah, this is. Now, the one thing that we do look at is if all the improvements made in Ragnarok, if you go back and play 2018, you might miss some of them, specifically in the combat and the movement and those type of things. And that's where I think the success of Ragnarok lies, because we've already seen that. Some people are like, yeah, then, you know what, I went back and played it. I was like, man, Kratos just feels a little stiff in this way and that, you know, like things we already knew we wanted to improve upon, and it's actually working out that way. But not so much that you're just like, oh, this is not a good game anymore. It's, you know, like they empower each other, much like the way that, you know, Empire makes A New Hope and Jedi like kind of sing, you know, in a certain way. And so I think there's a little bit of those elements that we took from inspiration, things we love, and wanted to make sure that that was baked in as well.
Have there been changes to how weapon, armor, and skill upgrades work in Ragnarok?
Yes, there's massive overhaul. The rarity system has been completely changed. For the armor, all armor can be taken to level 9. So there is no such thing as like, you know, early game armor that can't be taken. You can earn the right to transmog it as well. Yeah, every piece of gear can go to level 9. And the builds are much more interesting, in my opinion. And that's no disrespect, because I worked on all the last game with those guys. I think they just doubled down on the stuff that worked. And I played the game 10 times this year, and I played with a different build every time, and I had just as much fun every single time I played. So I hope other people are finding those builds interesting as well as they move through the content. But it's those systems are tough, you know, because some people don't want that part of it. They just come for the story. So we even took that into account. Like if you press R3, a little menu will come up and you're just like, give me all the best stuff for strength, and it just auto equips the whole system for you. Don't have to sweat it. You know, you can just do that. The skill tree's been updated as well, where you can, the more you use a skill, it unlocks a ability for you to put nodes in there to adjust them. So you can be like, oh, I really like this move, but now I want it to do more stun. Okay, you can make it do that now. But again, you have to work towards it. And what that did was make people more cognizant of maybe skills they weren't using. So we tried to like onboard people to the combat system as well, because, you know, these games are difficult. It's like people don't have a lot of time to learn the whole damn thing. So we try to find better ways to like bring them into the fun, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So you've got a great voice cast. Were there any, you know, sort of close calls we were casting, or did you know exactly who you wanted to go with for each role?
Yeah, I mean, we did a lot of auditions for certain parts, and then other parts we reached out directly, and we were super successful. But there's no drama there or anything like that. But yeah, we were very, very blessed to get that cast. Like I said, Ryan Hurst as Thor was awesome, and Richard as Odin's great, and You know, like there's some other ones I'd love to talk about, but I don't want people to know about them yet.
Well, Mihir is great. He talks a lot in this game, not in a bad way. He's really funny and insightful. How do you know? Like, is there a number how many stories he has, or how many voice lines for like those sort of incidental open world exploration parts?
That's an awesome question, because I should probably know that, and I haven't gone and looked at how many we actually shipped with. I know how many were like I've reviewed or looked at some point in time, but I don't know how many actually made the cut. So now, you know, I'm gonna have to take a little mental note here and go do a check, because somebody's gonna ask, but I'll get back to you. There's a bunch though. I know that for sure. Alistair Duncan, who plays Mihir, you know, he's great. He's fun to have on set too. He just keeps everything light and keeps people smiling. And he's the one guy that doesn't have to be in a suit. He just has the helmet on when we shoot the scenes, and he can kind of float around. So sometimes he forgets like it's even time to shoot. And they used to have a basketball with like a face painted on it that they would use as the prop, like on a rope that was him that Chris Judge would hold on to. But our mocap stage, they actually made him a Mimir's head this time. It was great, so he would know like when he was going to be in there, because they had the Mimir head out. But yeah, Alistair's fantastic. Do you have a favorite story that you've heard so far?
I don't know about favorite yet, but he's just like really one of the most likable characters.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
On the PS5, the DualSense controller, were you able to do anything really cool with the haptics?
Yeah, I mean, we went through everything in the game that we could with those. Like all the cinematics are done like to like the nth degree. The in-game stuff, the weapon things are feel really crunchy and good for what they can pull off. The one place I will say that's like the adaptive triggers, we didn't do as much with those due to the game being very like twitchy, like in combat, and those kind of like little bits of slight delays on some of the triggers didn't feel great for the moment to moment. However, in some of the more canned sequences, we did add those in to give it a little bit more weight and power to it. So we were a little bit more judicious with the adaptive triggers for our game. But the haptics, I mean, we went all in on, and then there's a whole nother pass specifically for the DualShock on the PS4. So we basically did that whole job twice to make sure both experiences were rock solid.
So looking at your credits, it looks like you've worked on just about every God of War game, going all the way back to the first one. What does this series mean to you, and what's your take on how it's changed over the years?
Yeah, I mean, this series is everything. This is where, you know, made first great game, God of War 1 with Dave and Corey and Charlie Wen and Derek Daniels and Richard Fogey, and I could go on and on. I mean, that team, I could almost list that whole team off because it was only like 40 people. But that was a really special moment. And kind of made me like buy into the fact that like if you really hone what you do and you work with really great people, you can make amazing things together. And I'll never forget the day that the final master copy was made. Shannon Studd still brought the whole team because we could fit into one room. It was so weird that I can't even imagine that these days, but a very small like conference room. And she had that disc in her hand and she goes, "This is what it was for. This is what everything, all that hard work over the last 3 years is for. And people are going to play this, you know, in a couple of weeks, and everything will change, right?" The action adventure games, because there wasn't a good action adventure game that came out of the West. All the good games came out of Japan, like DMC and Ninja Gaiden and all this. And this is going to change things. And she was right. It changed everything, you know, and we just a launching pad after that. And yeah, I've worked on all of them in different capacities, and it's just been really special. It's, to me, it's kind of like in sports these days, it's really hard to see like one player stay with a team from start to finish. But when they do, it's pretty special. You know, you look at like Tim Duncan with the Spurs. You know, you may never see something like that ever again. Or like Kobe with the Lakers. And we have a few people that are like that, like Jason McDonald, our design director. He's been with the studio since day one on God of War 1. He came in as a sound implementer straight out of USC. He was actually, the crazy story about this is he came into playtest because we ran out of playtesters for the day, so we called USC and they sent over some of their undergrads. And his feedback was so good, we were like, "Dude, do you want a job?" And then we got him. And he's been on every God of War, working his way up. He was like, he built Kratos on God of War 3, which is technically one of the best Kratoses ever. Design director on this game. And so there's a wall outside of my office with these huge, big, like, I don't know what they are. They look like 4 foot by 4 foot plaques of the games. And like that's like his resume is on the wall. It's like hanging those championships from the rafters at Staples or whatever, you know. And those are the things that are magical to me because I've worked with him like that. I've seen him come up and just do amazing things. And there's so many people on the team. I'm just giving one example right now because he's very near and dear to me. But that's the stuff that is really special. That you can spend that much time on it, and it's, you know, a lot of people bounce around and do a lot of different things, and you know, barely worked at anywhere for more than 2-3 years, and you know, he's going on like, I don't even know, it's got to be close to 20 years at this point. So it's awesome to see that type of stuff, and yeah, I hope that he can do even more here in the future, you know, and that's what we're setting people up for.
Very cool. Do you see any of the DNA of the original trilogy in Ragnarok?
Yeah, there were little things we brought back for sure that we wanted. You know, like I said, Kratos, he knocked that ring rust off. He's kind of getting back to some of his old tricks. So, you know, he's got the grapple swings back, moves the world a little bit more nimbly. The blades are a little revamped from the last game, so he almost feels a little bit more comfortable with them. Just little things here and there. There's some callbacks, like some Easter eggy callbacks that I wanted to do. But again, those kind of get into spoiler territory, so we'll have to stay away from those right now. There's a guy on the internet that people keep sending it on Twitter. I think his name's like Odysseus or something like that. I feel bad now, I can't remember his name, but he keeps pulling him up. He sees the references. He'll pull up the old shot and he'll find the Ragnarok shot and pair him up. And I was like, man, this guy's good. He keeps spotting things. It's like catching all my little tricks.
Seems like there's a greater enemy variety in Ragnarok than in 2018. Is that something you wanted to emphasize?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the leap from God of War 1 to God of War 2 was very similar. Like, there was almost like a 50% increase in the cast, and people loved that. So we kind of knew the roadmap of what we needed to do. I mean, truth be told, if we could have did that in the last game, we would have, but it would have taken a whole nother year. And it's like, at some point you have to ship these things. So it is what it is. And I don't think that cast is that lacking. I think that at this point in time, after 4 years, people need to find one thing to poke at. That's what they found. Now, obviously the trolls were always a sore spot for some people. But we took that to heart. That was one of the first things day one. I made like a cast list. And I think we got every single creature on there except for like one. And even then, I think it was put on there. It's like we knew we were going to cut it on purpose just to get production something that we got rid of. But it was really, really strong. You know, the team was able to pull that through. And it's funny because you can't just put more in. It has to be more in good, if not great. And I think that's where the real challenge comes in because people start to look back and you're like, oh my goodness, it took so long just to get those creatures there. Now we got to do a whole new batch and we got to get them that strong. And you guys have all these new toys that Kratos can do and you have to have responses to that. And it's like a exponential matrix of problem solving that explodes in your face, you know, but you're like, no, we got to do it because it's the right thing to do for the fans. But the bosses are increased as well, like, you know, by a lot. So I think they'll enjoy it. Are you enjoying it?
I am enjoying it very much. 2 thumbs up for me. Kratos has access to his Blades of Chaos early in Ragnarok. Is that something you knew you were going to do from the beginning?
Yeah.
Or was there some debate about that?
Nah, it was like, you know, the way that moment came off in the last game is like, you know, people say it's one of the greatest moments in video games ever. It's like, you're not going to duplicate that. Just give him to him. He earned him. He's back. So, that was day one. Plus, it allowed, like I said, for all the new mobility, like him, you know, like being able to rappel and grapple up quickly. And even that's one of my favorite things that I see is like people comment on is like they'll see Atreus do that, the little grapple thing too. And it's like, oh man, he's like Dad's doing it. And he already taught Atreus how to do it. That's awesome. You know, and you see that father, like, because the whole last game, remember, Atreus rode on his back. All the climb moments and stuff like that. And in this game, he doesn't do any of that. He's does all the stuff on his own. So that was another thing that was like very expensive to redo all that stuff. And the kid has to have his own version. But it's, in terms of storytelling, it has to be done, you know, because otherwise you'd be like, he's all grown up, but he's still got a piggyback ride. You know, like you'd be like, I don't buy it. So it's like, those are the things that you incur. It seems like such a simple thing. And then you look at that and it's like the animation budget for having Atreus move around the world on his own is like astronomically compared to what it was last time. You just pop him on Kratos' back.
Yeah. How much fun is it coming up with the ludicrously violent ways to behead and dismember enemies with those finishers?
Depends on your personality. Some people really enjoy that. Other people want no part of it. But it's those meetings are always interesting. I'll say that. There's a very select few people that like know how to ride the line between like, you know, what's too much or silly or kind of just right in the pocket. And so usually we get a lot of submissions on ideas, and then there's a smaller committee that kind of like condenses those down to meet the guidelines and the taste factor. And like I said, Bruno Velasquez is one of those key guys, our animation director.
You're constantly throwing new things to the player. There's the new Death from Above attacks, Frost Awakening the Axe, environmental kills. Were you ever wary of overwhelming the player?
Yeah, that's always a concern. I think I spoke of it here or maybe in another interview, but there's this, real thing in video games for players called the cognitive load, and it's like how much can they think about. So if you're trying to be like spatially, where am I? Where are the monsters? What am I doing? What was my armor build again that I want to take advantage of? There's just like the mental stack gets crazy, and so it's not all required. Some of it's for styling on guys, but it's a very, very hard line, because if you don't put anything new in, they're like, well, it's exactly like the last game. Then you can put this stuff in, they don't use it, and they still say then you have other people like it's too much. So you kind of just try to find a way to dole it out in small doses. So it's first start off kind of like, okay, I just use my axe, learn my variants a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to learn the blaze. Now we're going to put some environmental stuff in here. Now we're going to put an arena where you can move around, and you just start to acclimate them. It's almost like, like climbing Everest. It's like you don't just climb Everest. You go up to base camp and you hang out. Then you go up and you come back down to base camp and acclimate. Then you go up to base camp 2 and you hang out. And then, you know what I mean? You just do this until you get to the top of the mountain. So, and not everybody's going to make it to the top of the mountain. We're okay with that.
God of War 2018 already had great combat. How'd you go about improving it without messing up what was already working?
Yeah, that's another tricky proposition. We knew that Atreus was going to have to be a little bit more grown up to really, again, sell that idea that he's been training with Dad. So that was the first place. Like, is he going to be more aggressive? Can Kratos do things to allow him to do more things? Can Kratos play off of things he does? So that was like the first place we started. Then we started to take apart the combat system and look at it in a way that last game you kind of had basic attacks and then you had the runic attacks, and the runic attacks were on cooldown. So you kind of did all this stuff, and then you do a runic attack, but you had to wait for the cooldown, and there wasn't really anything in the middle. So we wanted to create some new moves, and that's where the triangle moves come in, where they're like, you can do them whatever you want, but you got to spend a little bit of time on them to build them up. And then there's the stuff with the immolation abilities as well, where you can build up the meter, and then you can choose to play risk reward and ride it out where your blades or axe are stronger, or you can cash it in and then you get a big burst of elemental abilities on there, and then you still have the runics. So we just tried to create a larger gradient of options for the player and play types, because again, you don't have to do any of it, but if you gravitate one way or the other or all of them, then you can have a more expressive Kratos. And then we opened up the choice a lot more with Kratos, like where you can kind of outfit what he does and whatnot without giving too much away.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Eric, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations on the launch of God of War Ragnarok. I'm loving the game. Got a 10 out of 10 from IGN and praise from other outlets as well. It just seems to be, quite an achievement. Congratulations again.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor, and it's very humbling to see the scores out there in the wild.
Coming up next, Jada from Podcast Beyond will be showing us some God of War Ragnarok's combat on the game's hardest difficulty, Give Me God of War, and then we'll be back to chat with Ragnarok's lead combat designers about what went into making the combat even better.
Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Joining me today is Jada from Podcast Beyond, and we're playing God of War Ragnarok on Give Me God of War difficulty. Jada, as Kratos moves into this combat encounter, who are you fighting? What is the plan for the stream today? Are you going to kick their butts?
Yes, and yes. I think that works for all of them. So this is the very first encounter. Just gonna be fighting some very simple level 1 raiders. Playing on God of War difficulty. We're gonna see some mini bosses. We're gonna see some skill trees. We're gonna see some cool things. Hopefully I pull off some amazing parries. Lots of good stuff coming today.
Awesome. Yeah, both Jada and I, for my preview, I played on Give Me God of War difficulty. Jada played through the whole game on Give Me God of War difficulty. So it is now going to be giving me a few tips to complete my run. But I love how the game feels this time around. They've made a lot of changes to combat. If you saw my preview, we actually talked to one of the animators who discussed how they have weapon-specific finishers now, how there's more verticality in the encounters, and all of that is really good. Now, in this early gameplay, Jada is using a lot of parries and the stun meter to her advantage, and it's just great. Have you enjoyed the Give Me God of War difficulty this time around?
Yes, it's been pretty difficult, not gonna lie. The hardest parts of the God of War difficulty is the earliest part of the game, because you just don't have all the tools that you would hope to have. You know, if you've played 2018, you're used to having the Blades of Chaos, you're used to having all the different runic spells. As you can see, I don't have any runic abilities at the start here. So I'm kind of reliant on shattering enemies, building up the stun gauge like you were saying, preventing them from leveling up when possible. Obviously, I failed on this guy.
He's a level 2, so you can still take them. And my favorite thing is still the parry. The parry is like so fun. It's so rewarding. That clash, and later on when you get the dodge mechanics that actually slow down time and impact how enemies are able to combat you, it's just a really, really great mechanic that they've added this time around. So you kick their butt. Where are we headed now?
So we're on our way. We're looking for Atreus. He has kind of run off somewhere. I won't spoil too much of the narrative portions of why we're looking for him. But obviously there's, you know, something mauled a bear. So who knows?
Yeah.
Apparently a larger bear, according to Kratos.
So we're concerned. Kratos is concerned about his son, and he's trying to find out what has been going on with him. And just before we go any further, I do want people to know that we've done our best to keep this spoiler free. There are going to be dialogue moments where Kratos talks during the combat sections and such, but for the most part, we're focusing on the combat, so your day one experience is as spoiler-free as we can muster. There is one thing near the very end. I'll give you a heads up before we get to it, but if you haven't seen the fight yet, we're going to be ending on that, so stick around to the end. So right now, you're still on the hunt for Atreus, and I love the exploration aspect. I am a sucker for loot, and I'm constantly looking for it. Did you find yourself doing that also?
Yes. As I played through, I made sure to stop and hit every chest possible, because early on in the game, hack silver is kind of not a commodity you get a lot of. And some of the upgrades, they start to get pretty pricey. So you find yourself like, oh, do I spend the money on a resurrection stone in case something goes bad in a fight? Or do I upgrade this piece of gear to hopefully not get in that predicament later? And so I opted most of the time for the gear, which led to a few more restarts than I probably would have liked. But, you know, it still worked out pretty well for me. And so now you're seeing this is one of the new abilities that they've added to Ragnarok, is you can now frost the axe just by holding triangle. And it adds different effects to it, depending on if you do a light or a heavy. Right now, we only have, it's a base, so it does the same thing. But once we get some skill tree stuff, oh, that should have been a parry.
You unlock the runic attacks, which you can level up. You're able to just level up your basic skills and such. And the reason the hack silver is so important is because often there's costs associated with not only upgrading your weapons, but the armor types that you want to use and what you end up doing earlier on. Just finishing the thought for you while you kick their butts.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, and you know, you were saying earlier about the shields and the different parries and stuff. Parries are so important in this game, especially on the God of War difficulty, because you just gives you that breathing room. There's a lot of perks you can build off of parrying. I ran a piece of gear that gave me rage, high chances for rage every time I parried. There's ones that can give you a realm shift,
which is the slow down time mechanic, right? Realm shift is slow down time, and rage later on also gives you that option. You can stat into a health boost when you use your rage, or you know, the beat 'em up option, traditional option when using rage. Which one did you actually go with?
You know what? I actually stuck with the Fury for the most of the game. But I did find some use in one of the other ones that was like a kind of a supercharged attack, like single use. And that was a lot of fun. And it worked out better in some of the boss fights. Just because sometimes you just wouldn't get enough time to really make use of the individual melee strikes or throwing the rocks, or you can't really tackle the bosses. So having that one single, like, big, meaty chunk of health is sometimes enough to either take a boss to the next phase, or potentially finish off the boss and get it to that, get that context sensitive button to pop up.
Did you feel like Gimme God of War difficulty was easier this time with things like the mid-battle boss checkpoints?
Yes, that's actually one of my things I just did not really like personally, because if I got into a fight and I was, half health, 3/4 health, that's something I need to be able to overcome. But instead, this time, if you die and once you got to a new phase, it heals you to full. It cheapened it a little bit for me, but I was thankful for some of the tougher fights when I was just trying to get through. It was nice to be able to just do that.
And just there, you ran off the ledge and you smashed into the ground. That's one of Kratos' new attacks where you're able to utilize a height advantage into an attack. So one of the things that has just been really phenomenal about playing through the game are little touches like that, where there is not a moment when Kratos can't do damage or is really left vulnerable. It seems like in most scenarios, maybe when you're going up vertically, you're left vulnerable for just a little bit. But otherwise, I love that everything is constantly in motion. Things are constantly propelling you forward and keeping you in the combat scenario. Now, I actually like those mid-boss checkpoints because I am not as good as you at the game, so I appreciate them. I love the challenge, and I love learning the patterns of the different enemies. I believe you're about to fight the first ranged enemy, the one you're throwing the axe at right now. And yeah, I don't know about you, but sometimes it's just really smart to play back and just throw your axe to whittle away at them, hit them with that frost damage, get them slowed down. And one thing Mitchell points out in his combat tips, which you can check out probably right now on IGN, watch that video because there's a lot of great stuff in there. You just trip them up by throwing the axe at their legs, for example, which will just sort of mess up their pattern and also halts their leveling up mechanic. And yeah, all of those little things are hugely helpful. I'm really excited to get a little bit further in because I see you keep hitting those parries, and the shield I picked, I'm just like, hit him with that follow-up, Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just about ready to jump to the next part. We got, I think, maybe one or two more little small fights, and then we're going to jump forward and show you something really cool. One of the first kind of mini bosses. Mm-hmm. And I'm really excited for that one because that one it kind of tripped me up at the start, but once I figured out the patterns, it was like, oh, this is really easy. But it takes it's all about just having that time and being able to, like you said, observe and, kind of memorize and learn these patterns for people.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're doing much better than I did. I think I got stuck in this room because I went right in, and if you go right in, everything spawns. Right? So you played that very, very well, where you just took on like 2 or 3 at a time. But when it's like 7 and one of them are a ranged enemy, throwing projectiles at you, it definitely gets hairy. So as you play more and more, you kind of learn about the scenarios, especially if you reset, and how to tackle them better. The game almost sort of teaches you like, hey, maybe play that a little bit slower if you're having trouble in that respect. I think you're about to find the bear, aren't you?
Yeah. So did we want to fight the bear here, or should we jump forward a little bit?
You can fight him, but before the end, let's jump forward.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Atreus, where are you?
Well, we found the bear, or he found us. Oh, he seems angry. Here it comes. Uh-oh.
You see, right now I'm using a lot of kind of ranged attacks because the bear doesn't stagger very easily. But if you get those sweet parries like that,
Yeah, you got it.
then you can.
This whole fight is basically about teaching you the parry mechanic and the dodge mechanic, which you need to survive, really. Because when that red ring comes, it's teaching you, okay, this will either kill you or do a lot of damage. It's not a blockable attack. The yellow rings can be parried. So in addition to all that, they're also showing you rage for, I believe this is the first time we actually utilize the rage mechanic to take on Bjorn the bear. And yeah, a really, really good fight. Just one of those early fights where it's teaching you how to play the game and how to play it really, really well. I love that you're getting that stun meter up there, but early on that stun meter recharges so quickly. You really, really got to be on your game. You're getting close to the end of the fight, so we're actually going to jump forward, but why don't you get that stun meter and let's see what happens.
So if for bosses and mini bosses like you saw there, we're going to go ahead and jump to the next save file.
Yeah.
But for those bosses and mini bosses, when you build up that stun gauge when they're not near a killable point, you'll see that it's just going to chunk off a section of their health. And so it's really helpful to be able to do that, because sometimes the bosses just have so much HP, especially on Give Me God of War difficulty, when their HP gets just, they have so many bars, and sometimes they're 2 or 3 levels higher than your equipment can even get. Like I think my gear towards the end is like level 8 right now, and I still see some enemies that are 2-3 levels higher. So it's very important to focus around that that gear level.
Absolutely.
And let's see.
What are we about to jump into here, Jada?
So we're going to jump in here. So this is the
Huntress. Great fight.
So this is we found Atreus. I have no shield. My shield has been destroyed. So blocking and parrying is a lot tougher because it just kind of breaks your guard. The Huntress is weak to. I have no idea why my camera switched to that. But the Huntress is vulnerable to ice. She's very easy to frost.
Yeah.
So you want to kind of do that, and then, as you know, Atreus pointed out at the beginning of the clip, those antlers, they glow. So they set her down, give you some time to get some free attacks in.
One of the things some people actually found a little bit too much were the constant tips from Atreus or whoever you happen to be running around with. I was in the opposite pool because there were so many times where their comments about how to tackle a fight ended up actually helping me solve for it. The one that I will give everybody is the "You're on fire." You probably already know that. I don't need to hear that line ever again.
I am so tired. That is the Aloy, I'll send this to my stash line from this game. And so I would be very happy if they patch that getting reduced.
Yeah. You think they could have done a few more voice lines in the studio about being a flame? You know? Yeah, the other thing I don't like is they took away my parry for this encounter because your shield is broken by an event that happens. And that bothered me so much because I love the parry mechanic in the game so much. And when it was gone, it really forced me to learn how to actually use the other mechanics, which was intentional. But I definitely miss it. So they're actually talking about runic attacks. Go in. Why don't you dive into the leveling up system, or not the leveling up system, the menus, and show off what these do.
Yeah. So the first runic attack you get is Winter's Bite. It is a light runic attack. So this is holding L1 and then pressing R1. This is great for just kind of gap closer, as well as sending enemies skyward. So it's really helpful if you get a group of enemies. You can knock them off a cliff. Get some free kills, easy kills. You don't lose loot when you knock people off of cliffs. So some games you're worried about that. If they are going to drop loot, it would drop forward. And there's also a mechanic when you visit your favorite blacksmiths that will also retrieve any loot that you happen to miss, which is great.
Yeah, they have a big old crate, and you can just pop it open and get any of the loot that you missed. And that has definitely gotten me a few extra pieces of hack silver.
Yes.
The hilts end up being important. So you just went in, you equipped a different hilt. Does that come into play later on, or is it sort of, Yeah, there's a lot of different hilts. I actually have a build that I use where every time that you execute somebody with like the R3 command, I have on my axe, it gives me a blessing of cooldown.
on my the pommels on my Blades of Chaos give me a cooldown on, or give me a gift of strength, and then I think on my shield, I had one that also gave me rage or whatnot.
Nice.
And so it's just like a nice kind of like min-max kind of build. It didn't have the best stats, but it did have some really cool stuff. Oh, we can jump in the skill tree as well. So as you're seeing, I haven't really bought anything yet. Don't really have a whole lot of experience, but this is the new imbue of the Leviathan Axe. They have this new cool skill labor to where you're rewarded the more you use specific moves. And then once you've used them enough times, you unlock the labor, then you do bronze, silver, and then gold. You'll be able to imbue these skills with different effects. Things like increased stun meter gain, increased element, damage reduction, or to keep you from reduces the damage you take when you're fighting if you get interrupted.
They've really
there's a lot of cool stuff.
Sorry to interrupt you. I just want to appreciate how much time they took and consideration into how you can build your character. The fact that you're talking about different builds for Kratos is awesome, because in the last game, it's kind of like, well, you have your weapons and they couldn't do much more. Another thing, if you could go mouse over the second tree, third one down on your blades, you can actually disable skills. So you've unlocked that skill right there. You can disable that. And the reason I like that is because sometimes the animation or a certain flourish that would happen that you would hit accidentally when you're, in an intense combat situation could cost you the game, basically. So if you have a combo that you really like, but one piece of it is messing you up, I love that you can hit that button and just turn it off. Do you have any last things that you want to cover off on besides don't sleep on Atreus?
Yes, do not sleep on Atreus. There's a lot of really cool skills. Him being able to draw aggression has saved me countless times where he just kind of runs up and uppercuts somebody with his bow, and gives me some breathing room. Sometimes he'll just go and charge at like the ranged enemies, and occupy them. So this is going to make me use the runic before we can move forward. So say, hey, you know how to use this.
Here's how you use it. Is there something that you still wanted to show in this section? I'm trying to remember what happens.
I think that's pretty much for this section. So what we can do now
let's
is
use the
jump.
Yeah, let's jump forward and use the magic of editing to jump right to it. Okay, so where are we now? This is a totally different place.
So we have traveled.
This isn't a fine.
Not now. There are enemies ahead.
We have traveled to Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves. You may recognize this area from the trailer. I think Kratos actually, one of the teaser trailers, came right up here and with his blades, kind of did a little jump like that. So we're going to just kind of imitate that. We're going to do some blade combat here.
Heck yeah. I recognize this area, and I hate these enemies. I hate them so much, because what'll happen is they will go away from you, and one will be hitting you with acid, while the others you're trying to do your regular combat with. So I found that kind of annoying, not in like a bad way, in a I need to figure out how to deal with this combat encounter. Now, I love the combat in this game. I think I've made that fairly clear, but when I talk about something that's frustrating, I mean in that I'm not good enough to take on this encounter yet. I have to figure out the combat puzzle of this arena that has been built. Were there any areas that you felt were cheap throughout your... Because you've beaten the game, right? Did you ever feel it got cheap?
There are a few areas that were tricky. I'm not going to lie. These enemies that you're talking about having issues with, these little guys right here, the little fast ones.
Yep.
Did not enjoy learning how to fight them. As you can see, poison from behind. We're going to go ahead and burn a resurrection stone there.
The poison is so brutal early on in the game. I hate it. I hate it so much. But there's one of those weapon-specific finishers that you got. Yep. Glad you had the stone ready to go. Oh, you use the blades to pull him in, right? I love that move. There's some really cool new stuff that they've done with Atreus' moveset and Kratos' moveset. And I like how the movesets actually feel like Atreus has learned from his dad and adapted those movesets to his own style. I don't know if you recognize that also, but that was my takeaway.
There's a lot of synergy. Oh!
They get ya?
That little guy, got me from behind.
I saw the shield. I got excited. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was gearing up for a shield bash to knock him back, and then I was gonna hit the fire jar, and unfortunately, he one of his friends came up from behind. So we're gonna.
You can use it as an opportunity to talk about the parry system and how this particular shield works, because this is the one that I really liked. How it works is basically if you manage to parry an attack, it charges up, and then you can double tap the parry button, and you will smash your opponent in the face for, I believe it's extra stun damage, right? In addition to regular damage.
Yes, so you do extra damage. You also do extra damage. You build up extra stun gauge, and then
there's that poison again. Yeah. Those guys, they really, really get on your nerves. Do not let them level up either, because they're basically a one-hit. If these characters get to level 2, because poison is so strong in the game, yeah, you want to take them out right away. Jada, I think it's pretty spoiler-free. What's the armor set that you keep telling me I need to get? It's about
so the armor
7 hours in, right?
Yeah, it's about probably about 7 hours in. Yeah. It's in the next realm. It's called Lunda's armor. And basically, it kind of reworked how I played the entire game. Because, you know, you think God of War, you think of all the weapons, but with Lunda's armor, it actually enhances bare-handed fights to where you just want to fight with your hands, because every strike, parry, guard with your shield actually will infect the enemies with poison. And when you infect enemies with poison, it does 3 things. It does, it lowers their level, which lowers their damage they do to you. Oh my goodness. And then
good play there.
It also increases how much damage you do to them.
Yeah, good play on the rage meter there. Rage, when you pop it in a pinch like that, not only do you get to do a lot of damage, but for every, I think it's every kill or maybe every hit, you actually regain your health. So it is definitely one way that you can get out of a sticky situation. And, you know, the early section that we showed you, I think you still got a stone. The early section that we showed you was an easier combat scenario, but it's still not a joke. Like, you still can't make a mistake. So maybe we're deterring people from trying out this mode by showing up just what happens. Like, you got to hit like 2-3 times in the whole encounter, and that's it. It's a reset for you, right? I like that, and I assume you do too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's the big thing. That's like what I was saying about earlier, when you just don't have the gear at your disposal. And wow, why are there so many people? I do not remember there being this many people in this encounter. I'm going to be honest.
I think this is one of those encounters where if you go to a point, you trigger the next scenario, and then you're just like bombarded with enemies. There's a section like that in the mines also. Spoiler, you go to a mine location. And I did the same thing. I was like, how do I get past this? It's like too much to deal with. And I'm like, oh, I'm triggering the combat scenario down there. So I'm having to deal with like 12 enemies or something as opposed to 3 at a time, which is a little bit more manageable.
Yes. There we go. It's like, I'm pretty sure there's a health stone down here. And the cool thing about, I will say also, is so the health stones that you will find just placed around the map, those actually respawn over time. So when you're just kind of exploring, don't worry about saving those for later, because you're just leaving health on the floor or on the table, I guess, at this point. Because they just kind of respawn after some time. So you can always come back and restock on them. Oh, there's a little bit of crafting materials there. Some beast scraps from all the beasties we just took down.
It's hard not to pick that stuff up. Like, once it's ingrained in you, especially when you need to upgrade your stuff to be successful, you have to get it, you know?
And beast scraps are something that you will need for like pretty much the entire game. It's one of those resources that like you keep getting new pieces of gear, specific gear that require beast scraps, and you don't get them as often as you probably would like. So like you do find yourself kind of going back and hunting down different types of beasts to get those scraps to drop so you can upgrade the gear.
Jada, is this the fun train ride?
This is the simple train ride.
Oh, okay.
We're not going to show the fun train ride.
Oh, I was going to say we should do the fun one and then transition.
Should we do the one? We can do the fun one.
No, it's
we're not very far away from it. So, but this is a fun, like, I love there's so much kind of like Disneyland theme park adventures in Kratos' journey. This one kind of reminds me of that, like, what is it? The Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, like, train ride at Disneyland.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that one. It's very simple, very slow, but it's fun.
And then you get to this new section and it's like, okay, now solve the puzzle of how to go further up the mountain and get to the next location. And it's gorgeous. Like, the game is gorgeous throughout everything that I've played anyway. Did you enjoy the rest of it?
Yeah, and and keep in, like, we're playing on performance mode. I played on, I missed that. That's terrible.
Yeah, the Ravens are back. Odin spies.
Which we call it I'm playing on performance mode now, but I played my first playthrough on resolution mode because
you played
my
it
game
30.
To look pretty.
You played it 30? Okay.
Yes, I played it in 30, my first playthrough, all the way through. So, like, the tough fights, if you think, you got an easier time doing them on 60, like, 30's, like you have less frames to, like, see things.
Yeah, and on that note, like, when I booted up the game, you check out IGN Performance Review. JD, feel free to keep going as I ramble here about resolution. But when you start up the game, it gives you a bunch of options to choose from. Like, do you want to play resolution, performance, 120 if you have the TV to support it? You can play it 45 target frame rate, sort of a mix of them both. I think Insomniac did a really good job of offering you a plethora of options and ways to push and pull, like, PC gamers like myself. I play a lot on PC, so I love being able to sacrifice what I want to sacrifice. Like, maybe I don't care as much as shadows, or maybe I don't care much about certain aspects of the game, but I still want it to look as pretty as possible and hit a frame rate target I have in mind. Consoles have finally got there, and PlayStation does an amazing job of giving you all of that with God of War Ragnarok on the PlayStation 5. As you keep destroying this Dreki, I gotta say one more thing. The base PS4 is also really impressive. The base PS4 runs at 1080 30 and looks great. Our graphics comparison, like, unless you zoom in, you can't really tell. But getting to the boss fight, the Dreki here, it has a lightning-based attack. I fell in love with the game, basically, with this Dreki boss fight because I love how it's telegraphed. I love how it changes up your expectations after learning all these combat things. And that was the point that did it for me. Why did you want to show the Dreki specifically? Just because he's awesome?
Like you were saying, the Dreki fight is just so much fun. It really, like, teaches you the parrying, when you should dodge. Like, that attack is parryable, but it's not really, you don't get a lot out of parrying that strike, and you take a lot of damage if you miss it.
Yeah, that tail will wreck you. He has the lightning attack, which will wreck you. He has the tail attack, which Atreus is constantly cueing you about, by the way. This was one of those fights where I'm like, I'm so glad Atreus is here, because I don't know if I would have parried that tail whip, basically. Because he kind of tells you, and you have your frame window as
I died there.
telling you when you can do it.
Yeah. So, like I said, if you miss that timing on that parry, it's a little bit trickier on that one, and it's not really worth it, and you take a lot of damage. So
yeah, play it safe, and you'll get through it. That's the moral of the story. Do you want to give it one more shot, or do you want to jump forward and show something new?
So I don't have a save at the fun train ride, unfortunately.
That's okay.
So
you'll have to see for yourself. Game's out now, so yeah. All right. Well, Jada, you take down this Dreki, and then we'll move on to the next one.
Sounds good. The front train ride is literally right after this, so if I get the win here, which I should, we'll be able to see it.
I just like the climactic ending of the fun train ride, so I would love to share that with our audience, but yeah. It's nothing too spoilery, it's just, I just thought it was great. Yeah, the Dreki is so cool.
One thing you guys may be seeing is that green arrow, the green circle status effect on that Atreus is building up with his arrows. Those are sonic arrows. Those are really helpful for keeping enemies knocked into the air. If you can knock them manage to get knockups, it will keep them hovering in stasis. The Dreki, unfortunately, is a little too heavy for that.
That helped me so many times, but on those smaller enemies, if you hit it in a group, and let's say you've upgraded it, they'll all hover there, and they take extra stun damage if you put them in the wall. So that was definitely one of the enjoyable mechanics for Atreus, and that's why Jada and I are just like, do not sleep on Atreus. He was strong in the first game. He's even stronger in God of War Ragnarok, and I love how his combat works with Kratos to allow you to succeed in these fights. Yeah, you got him. You got your rage meter up all the way. Like, you can just pop that and finish him off if you want. Or just do it the old-fashioned way. Blades of Chaos are doing it for you. Got him. That's it. Boom.
I love that they incorporated Atreus into these like finishers, and it just really, it cements that bond of them like really working together.
And the game also is using that continuous camera shot that they famously did with the first game, and a lot of people applauded them for that. So it's nice to see that returning, and the game still this is still very early. Like, how far is this in? Like 3 hours, 4 hours?
Yeah, this is probably around 4. It depends, because like when that first fight when we swapped to Svartalfheim, that skipped a bunch of side quests.
Yeah.
So there's a whole second half of the lake here that I could have went and explored.
The blue icons, those are your, what are they called? Tasks?
Those are those are your the favors.
Favors, that's the term, yeah.
Yes. So these are favors that you could be doing, which are just their side quests. So these guys, are really frustrating for a lot of people, but if you use the blades and just kind of whip the ground,
don't forget their nest.
You just wipe through them pretty easily.
Yeah. So I think when we exit out of this segment and go on to the next save, let's let the train ride play out, and at the stinger, we'll move on to the next one.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so you've solved the puzzle of that area. You can come back here. There's other stuff, actually, that you can't collect right now. And the game consistently does that, right? Where it has you go back to an area and like, oh, I know that's a collectible up there. I have to go get it. And I was obsessed about that. So just to tell you right now, there's stuff you're just going to have to wait for and go back for later. Also, Atreus is totally trolling you during this. I had it the first time, and then he makes you move it.
Yep. I did it the opposite this time just to see if he was trolling.
Yeah.
Because I literally did it the right way last time. It's just having fun with you. And so like he's just there, just whatever.
We're so close, just a little to the left. And then I'm like, I can clearly tell that the track is not lined up right now.
I know. Yeah. This is so like just not parallel to the tracks when he has you turn it. Like, go to my left. Like, no, that's not right. I know that's not right, Atreus.
Yeah. So this is one of the fun train rides, I call them, and the reason I think it's so fun is because it kind of subverts your expectations. And the game does that a few times really, really early on. And this is just one of the examples of it.
You're looking for Tyr because we don't trust Odin, right? If you think about it, War could... Uh-oh. On your left!
Look for a bridge and stop the train! There should be a leader of some sort! Found it! The brake stuck! Keep trying, little brother! Stop this train!
I think it's about to...
No! Shit! Get up!
Father!
I love that.
And
I love
I did too.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I do feel a little robbed. I was like, sweet, a troll fight. I've been wondering when we're gonna get. And then they give you one, and Kratos just does all the work for you.
Yeah, Kratos is just like, no. This is the section, by the way, where I just got slaughtered. But anyway, we were going to jump forward anyway. So Jada's going to bring up another save right now, and we'll jump into that in just a few seconds. Okay, so we've jumped around again, and earlier we talked about the favors in the game. And Jada, what are we going to go do right now for the favors?
Yeah, so we've actually jumped a little bit backwards from where we were earlier, but this is Svartalheim still, and we're going to kind of explore the lake, the Bay of, what is this called? The Bay of Bounty. And Mihir has been troubled by some mining rigs, thank you, Atreus. And
we're avoiding spoilers on that one. There's a lot of context to that is delivered while you go to them, but we're just going to let you experience that in the game, obviously.
Yep. So, but yeah, so we're going to go and, shut down some mining rigs and, help liberate.
Liberate the mining rigs. Sorry to interrupt you, but these areas, they're not only little puzzles, there's also combat elements. It's not like you can just walk up and shut down these rigs. What they've done are they've introduced new enemy types. They've given you puzzles to solve in these areas. And sometimes they surprise you with some harder than you might expect enemies here. The whole favor system and just this area in general, it's the first time you really get to explore the map, start seeing what the side quests are going to be like. And like I said, you start seeing things that you clearly can tell are an ability you're going to get later and utilize to get more collectibles and such. Did you end up coming back here once the game was all done?
Yeah, there's a few objectives that populate afterwards. So I made a couple trips back to Svartalheim. There's also some in-game later stuff, and you definitely probably don't want to take it on early on.
Well, one we're gonna show later, they're called the Hateful, and it was one of the first thing you and I messaged each other about. I was like, hey, were you able to beat this Hateful character in this early area? They are this enemy type. They're Draugr, and they come out of these holes near the mining rigs, and they're exceptionally difficult. They're very fast. They use fire, and they'll just eat away at your health so fast if you're not paying attention, as most things
and they're
do.
Important enemies to fight too, because they drop upgrade materials for your axe or your blades of chaos. So these are fights that you want to do at some point or another, because it's just you want more power, you want more strength from your axe, you want more I think is it runic from your axe and strength from your blades, one of the two. But yeah, you want as many of those bonuses as you can as you progress, especially playing on the Give Me God of War difficulty. Every stat point can really help make the difference in some of these fights that you're trying to make or break, how fast you get through them or how much damage you take per hit.
Yeah. In the background, so we're playing this before it's available to the public. We're going through, and we actually don't know if we've seen all the trophies, but I don't think any of them have anything to do with playing through on the hardest difficulty. That's just for your own pleasure, if you want to call it that.
Yes, exactly. Which is good.
This fight is not for the faint of heart. It's definitely tough. This enemy type has this ability where it actually spawns the little babies. I call them the babies, but wretches. Yeah, definitely a hard enemy to face because of those little guys. But I actually found this to be one of the easier enemy types to kill.
Yeah, these guys, their patterns are pretty predictable.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a lot of HP going into this, and one of those little guys got me.
Yeah, the little guys, if they overwhelm you, they explode. They do a lot. But this guy, him or herself, Not one of the more difficult. However, that doesn't mean that these favors are easy. There are some where there's more of the frog-like characters that you're going to have to take on, and those I found to be much more difficult because they're using verticality, they're using more of the map and their abilities, and I do like the animation when he takes them out. So
yes, the execution animations are very well done in this one. It's just, it feels very visceral. It reminds me a lot of the over-the-top that we got in like the previous trilogy or original PS2 God of Wars. Like it's really nice to see the callbacks and kind of a theme that kind of continues along through this one, which is was very welcome for me. I very enjoyed it.
Small things I'm just being reminded of as you're picking up health and the collectibles and such. I remember that when you actually pick up health things near a boss during an encounter, it will stun them. Yeah. So just a small pro tip, but you can use those strategically to your advantage, and sometimes they really, really help you out, especially in a fight we'll probably see later on. Yeah, so this is the first exploration area. You get to look around, you get to go to all the different islands. I did all the favors. They were very fun. Oh, yeah, this enemy type is interesting also. This is an enemy type, not really an enemy type, more like a collectible character, where you can't hit them directly on. You have to hit them from behind, and if you kill them, then you can go down there and get some valuable resources from them. And there's a lot of stuff like that as you're exploring in Ragnarok that I appreciated. I just love stuff like that, so... And XP is so important. XP is tied to a lot of your skill tree upgrades, and I think you use XP for a few other things in the menu too. Do you remember off the top of your head?
Yeah, so you'll use your XP for your runic upgrades. You'll use it to upgrade your rage. You'll use it to, like we said earlier, augment your different skills and abilities. And I believe there's like one or two other little things that you can use it for that are escaping me right now. But there is a lot of stuff to use it for. Let's see. I forget how I'm supposed to get in here.
I think you just jump down when you were up there.
All right. Well, we'll grab it. I'll grab it later. Not important.
You have your main save. This is just your funsies save anyway.
This is funsies. Not going to waste time going back up and around. All right.
The reason I really like all this side stuff is because you get a lot of dialogue between the characters. They're constantly telling you more story while you're smashing barrels and collecting the drops that like increase your stats in the game. And I like that relationship is further solidified between the different characters.
Yeah, same. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask what you thought.
Yeah, no, I love all the stories that we get from Mihir. Even Kratos tells a few stories that I won't spoil, but they're very Kratos stories.
Yeah.
Is the best way I can put it without being spoilery. But it's such a treat to hear more of Kratos speaking because, you know, a lot of times it's very like most of his remarks are like prompted, and sometimes he just kind of talks occasionally.
Yeah.
Apparently, I am going in the wrong direction.
He's very one note, right? And I think I think because of the relationship with his son, we actually get to see more of Kratos, and I like that they used his son as the vehicle for Kratos to, I don't know the right way to say it, but sort of flesh him out as a character. He opens up a little bit. He talks about his past experiences. He's trying to advise his son about the mistakes that he made in his life so that his son doesn't make the same mistakes, like talking about, you know, just fighting and how he's trying to avoid it. They're out in the woods at the beginning of the game, and he kind of gets forced back into combat, not by his own choice, you know? So,
yeah, it's a there we go. Yeah, no, 100% agree, because like, you know, Kratos has been this character that we all feel like we know, you know, pretty well, for those of us who've played, or anybody who's played a lot of the God of War games, but like you get so many different layers from him because of his like interaction with other people. And it's such a treat to kind of peel back the layers of that onion, so to speak.
I smash all of the fake statue things just out of paranoia. I'm like, if there's a fight, I want to know it's coming, you know?
Exactly. I want to get that first hit in.
Yep,
I want to have that advantage because sometimes it's that one hit can make all the difference. I've died a few times where an enemy had 0 HP, like they literally had no HP left, and I'm just like, oh, okay, well, but I died, so doesn't count.
In addition, yeah, and one of the ways you can get that extra hit in are those barrels that you're breaking. If you wait and time it right, you can often hit those and they will just obliterate enemies if they happen to be anywhere near them. So that's definitely come in clutch for me a few times.
Yeah, using the environment is very important for sometimes, like, it can help, like, it may not kill the enemies, but it may stagger them, it may knock them back and give you time to finish a combo or something else. You know, just any tool you can use, the better.
Yeah, speaking of the Draugr, there they are.
Yep.
I really like the abilities that bring you into the fight or bring them to you. It's a good way to sort of separate the pack, and there's that juggle. It does seem like juggling is very powerful in this game. No matter how you choose to play, like you choose the stat into a I don't know what to call it. I'm playing a lot of Marvel Snap. Destroy build.
Yeah, like you can build into your
damage
stats.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can build into your strength. You can build into your runic for your runic attacks and stuff. I think most of my playthrough, I focused on strength because I just kind of wanted to get through the enemies as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And then my second priority was luck, to get a bunch of things to proc that I needed to proc constantly, like the rage bursts on parries and stuff like that. Because we were talking earlier about the shield that I'm using,
yes,
which is by far, I know between the two of us, our favorite shield.
Yeah.
Because just having that ability to, gain stats like rage off of it and do extra damage, get better stuns. Oh, that's right.
You gotta set it just right, and then you jump over, and then this is what I was talking about though. They're not always straightforward. You have like a puzzle element, and I mean it's not overly challenging or anything, but it is sort of like an added layer to the onion of the entire God of War experience, right? So you have these puzzles, you have combat puzzles, and then you have like a cool encounter usually at the end of these favors. And I think you're about to go in, you're almost there, right? Yeah,
yep,
so here you go.
At the top of the mining rig.
Yeah, I am curious because you and I both use this shield because it just does so much stun, and it's really versatile in what it can do. I would love to hear from somebody that used the other shield to explain to the viewers who haven't played it yet. Basically, you have a larger shield where you can just block most things. I think you still need to avoid the unblockable attacks, but you absorb that energy and then you can just slam it into the ground. You've probably seen it in the trailers. And then there are other shields that have also been in the pre-release trailers that are potentially used in other ways. So having
one of the other ones I really liked was there's one for that cleanses your status effects.
Oh, nice.
So, like, if you get, covered with frost, poison, fire, whatever, you can double tap with the shield dash, and it not only cleanses the effect from you, but it deals that elemental damage to the opponent.
Good reflect.
So, really helpful in some of the later fights.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I was seeing your health, and then I saw you get that perfect parry, and I was like, all right.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
And those are the moments that feel really good.
Mm-hmm.
Just being able to kind of clutch out those moments. It's it really makes you appreciate the combat in the game and just how, like, balanced it is. Even on how difficult, the higher difficulty, it still never feels unfair.
Yeah.
It feels like if I miss a parry, I'm like, okay. If I die because I missed a parry, it's because I missed a parry.
It's on you as the player. Yeah.
Yes, it's not because I didn't have a fair chance.
Yeah. And I want to give the biggest shout out to the sound design team on God of War Ragnarok and the effects team, because like those circles that come in, everything's telegraphed in a very perfect way where you feel like it's on you. You never feel like the game has betrayed you. Well, not what I've played so far. You never feel like you were misled or tricked or anything like that. It's just your skill. You have to get better to figure out how to solve the encounter puzzle, right?
Yep. And yeah, in certain encounters, it's like certain moves are just more useful than others. Like I really like the Hyperion grapple or pull or whatever it's called, because that one like shoulder charges you into somebody and builds up a high amount of stun, and you can augment that with even more stun. So like you can just like shoulder charge somebody 3 or 4 times and build up their stun and then do the execute, which is a great way to, you know, remove one enemy from the combat. This is the chest. You'll find at all the blacksmiths. Anytime you see Brock and Sindri, this chest will be here. If it's glowing blue, it means you missed something to pick up. And so you don't miss anything. We can actually swap shields and kind of show off one of the other ones.
I would love to see it because I love the Dauntless shield so much that I just kind of stuck with it. But I am curious about this. And while you're here, we should also show off the upgrade pass and how things sort of start stacking upon each other. Like, why don't you show us sort of early game builds and how you would deck Kratos out?
Yeah, so right here, first off, I'm going to go ahead and craft this Nidavellir armor. This is what we're getting rewarded for clearing out these mining rigs. This armor, it keeps the stun gauges filled longer, and then when you with the chest piece, when you stun grab somebody, you get a health burst, so it heals you. So it really pays off to be able to do these side quests, because this is a really good armor set for early game. And then let's see, we wanted to do some skills. Let's see. So as you can see, I've already upgraded my freezing throw to add extra stun, but if I wanted to swap that, I could add extra protection, so I get damage resistance and resistance being staggered while I'm charging up the throw. So that way, you know, if somebody's coming in and you're not sure if you're going to get the throw off in time, you could potentially still get the throw off and mitigate some of the damage you would take. Or you can just increase the damage. I personally like the stun bonus. Got the axe throw. I like adding the frost element to this one. I want to see if there's any other upgrades that I want instead first, though. As you can see, my other techniques here, I've added stun just to the regular charging of the axe. That's my build is all about stun damage. That's my preferred way to play. I like stunning enemies, and then I like just being able to, you know, finish them off and activate these abilities on my armors. And actually, you know what? I'm going to buy this so I can charge that because I like that skill. I like being able to do that. As for my Blades of Chaos, let's see. There we go. This is the Hyperion pull that I needed to.
Very fun.
Yes, so this is one of my favorite Blades moves because it gives you a small invulnerability window. It does a good amount of damage, a good amount of stun, and when you upgrade it, you can add even more stun. There's gear to boost the stun for it even further, or you can boost the element so it does more fire damage. All right, this one took me a couple tries, I remember.
Yeah, this one's tricky.
Didn't get him.
So that is sort of one of the elements we were talking about, though, where you can utilize the environmental explosive goodies to hurt your enemies. There's also that big rock there. I don't know if you can show that off while you're kicking butt here. But I love these rocks. These are great to take off a significant amount of health from your enemies, or just take them out straight up. That works also. Are there nightmares in this section in addition to these guys? Or is that later?
I think there might be in this one, but I don't It might not. It might be in the next section where nightmares start to appear.
Okay. Yeah, those were the little guys from the first game that shoot projectiles at you, and that's in addition to all of these characters. Yeah, let's see the new shield.
Oh, there's nightmares right there.
So, there you go. You can, oof. You can utilize that other shield. It builds up power, and then you have to sort of detonate that power that's been built up and utilize that against your enemies.
I did not know what happened there.
The difficulty is no joke. Like, you get absolutely wrecked if you make a mistake and you just get caught in a bad pattern. You just reset and you start the encounter over. You know, that's just sort of how it is.
The crazy thing there is, like, when you see an enemy that's stunned and you can grab them like that, usually you get like a minor invulnerability window.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I was trying to do there, to give myself some breathing room. But apparently either the gauge ran out or it just didn't trigger, because I think it might have been trying to climb me up here.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, I think it might have had some of that. Might have gotten in the way.
Yeah, once those nightmares come into the scenario also, it gets really, really tricky, because you're just getting hit with a lot of projectiles and you can't do too much about it except for get out of the way, like move back further so that you can reset the combat arena and just get a better perspective of how you're surrounded or where the enemies are coming from, and then go for it. I have to imagine you're also at a slight detriment because you're using a shield that you're not normally playing with.
Yes.
And yeah, and that's not going to help. There's Atreus. So I always say, even in the first game, don't sleep on Atreus, because he just saved your butt. He jumped on that guy's back, he locked him up, and you're able to do your thing in the game. The gameplay is just so good. I can't emphasize how fun this is. I know we keep iterating that we're playing on the hardest difficulty, but the reason that is important is because it gives you a better appreciation of all the different combat mechanics that have been added or changed with this entry of the game, in my opinion. And I think you're about to finish off the last one or two, right? Or is there another wave up here? I don't remember. Yeah, this one was challenging for me too. I definitely had a few resets. It was not... It's not an easy fight. You're trying to lure him into the pot, huh?
Yeah.
Did you get him?
I think I got him.
Nice.
I think so. All right, let's see. But there's somebody behind me. I'm trying to... There we go.
Trey is sounding for you. Yeah, looks like you got 2 left, and then you're all good. Those acid pools too, like... I don't know. There's a lot going on with this character type where things can get out of control real quick, like right there. I love having the raids to fall back on, though. It's very, very helpful to be able to pop that and then continue your fight, because otherwise that just would have been it. Actually, you didn't use your stone yet, so you still have that going for you.
There we go. All right.
And also, I actually don't think you should complete this. So let's jump to the next area, because I think there's some cool lore stuff that happens. So we're going to jump forward to the next thing. Let's check out that hateful fight you were talking about.
Yeah, I got a cool hateful fight we're going to jump to. I got all my notes here, so we'll just kind of jump into those.
So the hateful they're new. I don't remember them from the original game.
I think it's the same kind of like Draugr type enemy that we've seen in the previous game, but they've been kind of elevated to a higher level. I think because you'll notice a lot of the attacks and stuff will be pretty much nothing new that you haven't seen in 2018, but they're a lot stronger than they were. This one was a little bit of a tricky fight. I'm hoping that I'll be able to take it down in one go.
I love that you frosted up the axe before you even went in.
Yes. It's one of those things you can kind of prep. Ooh, I timed that wrong.
Nice. Yeah, so we've jumped forward to this hateful fight. This is what I referenced in my preview, where I said I got in a little bit of trouble by going off the beaten path. It was the hateful that I kept encountering, because these fights, they're really, really fun, but they're really, really challenging. You make like one mistake, you're going to be hurting. You make 2, you're done, and you're resetting that encounter. I would get stuck on these for like, I don't know, half an hour before I figured them out. This one went a little smoother for me, because you can kind of cheese him by getting up on that platform. But he brings in his buddies, so then you got to crowd control his buddies, and if they level up, the whole thing just goes nuts. You're doing a great job, though, Jada.
So the big thing with this fight that kind of helps make it more manageable, you can get him in this corner.
Yeah.
It just makes it real easy to kind of build up that stun gauge.
And then you get that huge chunk of health just knocked right off. And his parries, if you can usually get the first few, which is helpful. Oof. Yeah, and that speed move is very, very difficult to time right. I'm very excited. So after this, we're actually going to be, Damon, our host, is going to be talking about combat with the combat leads. So I'm very interested to hear from them about a super nerdy thing, input latency. Good job spreading that boss, by the way, Jada. Yeah. Because I don't notice it as much in this game. I have noticed it in some other games on the PlayStation, and it's a nerdy thing that very few people notice except for me, I think. I do not notice it in God of War, so I'm curious what they've done to mitigate that. Yes, you can play at 120 frames, which will bring that down. Playing at 60 brings it down. I still don't know how Jada did it on 30, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also helping me on the 60 run. I'm doing this much smoother.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you're playing through, keep an eye out for these barrels because they drop rewards. And they don't ever tell you, really, that these barrels are there, are a thing.
Jada, you made that fight look easy.
You know, I just do what I do.
Yeah, you tore through that in like 2 minutes.
I know. I like planned out all these segments on you. I'm like probably gonna die a couple times. That'll fill up the schedule a little bit. But,
or I'll just rock it.
You know,
I'll rock it. Well, what do you
Yeah.
want to jump to next? Those fights are really good. There's one in the boating area. Also, don't miss that. And then there's this one in the mines, which you'll explore later. Do you want to do the elves? Do you want to do the elves next?
Yeah, we can jump to the elves. Let's do that.
And while Jada's loading that up, I just want to call out that every area that we've jumped to has a unique color palette. I love how the visual design throughout the game is constantly changing. I never felt bored by going to a new place or just like, oh, I'm in the desert forever at any point in the intro of the game. It's all really visually beautiful or interesting in some way.
You know, one of my favorite things also is you're going to see so many areas that you saw in 2018, but they're so different now. Like even Alfheim here, oops, I can just saw all. It's such a treat to be like, oh, I remember this area last time I came through here. But it's so different now. As you'll notice in this next area, most people will remember, like, this is when you came to Alfheim last time, you were just kind of boating around on the water until you got to the temple. We're in the temple right now.
Yeah.
And so...
and it's different.
It's a little different.
This fight's great. And it's different because of what happened in the previous game. They teased as much in the original game saying, you know, you made a mistake by picking the side that you picked. And I like that because you get to see the effects of that intervention in a fight that really wasn't one you wanted to be a part of, but you picked a side at the end of the day, right? And I think they really focused these fights around parrying. Maybe that's why I like this section so much. But this entire level, it's no joke. It's one of the harder parts of the game, especially when you go to that center area and they introduce I call them wizards. I don't know what they're actually called, but they use more mystical abilities in a middle section of this level design. And it gets really challenging because you have to like detonate these bombs that are chasing you and watch out for bombs that hit the ground while you're attacking these sword bearing characters. And that blue icon that keeps coming up, that says, hey, you can't do damage to this character because you need to use your double tap of the parry to smash their shield break, and then you can, continue the fight.
Yeah, and what you probably saw me throw the axe. There's this, you guys will learn more about that when you get it, but it's basically a little help me in these fights against these elves because they know that they can be tough to stun sometimes.
Yep. Yeah, that does a ton of stun damage. What's your build that you're doing that much stun on an axe throw?
So we can pull it open real quick. Let's see. So I think at this point I've pretty much upgraded a bunch of skills. So you see stun there, stun there. These ones are adding elemental. And then if we go into my armor, again, we have that Nidavellir armor that we built last time. But I'm wearing a from killing enough of the Raven's Tears, or the Odin's Ravens, it increases the healing. So not only am I getting health bursts every time I stun grab somebody, I'm getting a 15% bonus by wearing half of the Raven gear set.
Got it.
So.
Yeah, and I think you're vastly approaching the area I was talking about where things start getting a little bit tricky. What other sections did we have on the list to show today, though? The fight. We have the fight.
Yep.
And anything else?
I think besides this, that's probably our last big one.
Okay.
I think we're gonna jump to that after this.
Yeah, we're actually vastly approaching time, so why don't you shred these characters? say night night to the night elves or whatever they're called. And then we're going to jump to the fight. Now, if you've seen the leaks for God of War Ragnarok, this is probably the most spoilery thing that we're going to do, but also it's been leaked everywhere for like 2 weeks. So do you want to jump to it, Jada?
Yeah, let's go ahead and jump away to that. I just got to make sure we jump to the right one. And let's see, we're jumping into the cutscene, right? We're going to show it all? We're
going to come right back after the super spoilery part, but on the good part. So editing magic.
I've been waiting for this. You're not from here. We got a tradition called blood payments. It means I get a piece of you for what you took from my family. You'll pick it up. That was for Baldur.
What an intro. I love everything about it. Yeah, so this is the Thor fight. I talked about this in my preview. Maybe you've seen the leaked footage, but yeah. On the hardest difficulty, no joke. Very, very fun though. I enjoy this. I like how he fights.
Ooh, I dropped my guard there.
He is very difficult, so it might not go swimmingly on the first try, but we just have to get to each of those boss checkpoints, which I like, Jada doesn't like, and we can advance it a little bit. So, Jada, what was your reaction the first time playing through this?
Where's my openings?
Yeah.
Figuring out like if you miss those parries, like where do I find these openings to deal some damage to this guy? Because right now I don't have my axe. So this first part at least.
Yeah. So it's all about you got to get your parries right. You got to get that stun meter up. He has a slap you can parry. Some moves are telegraphed, some are not actually in this encounter. And there you go, you actually got one of the animations. Does that transition you to the second phase or no?
Yep, this is going to phase 2.
Nice, well done. So he's calling his axe, and then you get to actually see the second phase of the battle. I like that his axe takes time to get to him.
Yeah.
You know?
There's actually, so that Alpine section we showed earlier, those reflecting walls, the stones, I actually at one point just left my axe there and just let it endlessly reflect. And it didn't come back until I got to a shop and was upgrading something.
That's funny. So Thor grabbed Jada at one point and she actually hit the L1 timing on that. That's not easy to do. I think I've only done it like twice, so props for doing that in this type of environment. And yeah, Thor gets a little tougher as you get further into the battle, but yeah, I don't know. It feels a little like he's holding back in this encounter. I don't know. But yeah, so we're in phase 2 now, and we get to see how it continues from here.
So this is kind of like your first like real like boss fight of using the environment, which is really helpful in this section.
Yeah, we saw the stones earlier on.
See if we can lure him over here.
Oh yeah, I used all of these. No, you got him.
Woo! Yeah, he dashed in. I didn't think he was gonna dash in.
I think it's free. I think if you get it, like, he will aggro on you, and then you kind of get the damage.
No, I've actually missed a few times. There's been a couple times where I've done this fight, and he like dashes away, like right as I did it.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh.
He is a lot like Baldur in some of his mechanics, but definitely his own. He's his own thing, right? He's got Mjolnir. He's got these cool burly slaps that he does. I really, really like this fight so much. Oh.
So, I love the use of Mjolnir and that, because it's just like you've got to use it at least once in a game with Thor, like the back hit, it's matching like crazy.
Oh,
and yeah.
All right, well, we'll just reset really quick. Wait.
Yep.
I say when we're done.
That is so good.
It's such a great psych out. Like we were talking earlier about subverting expectations.
Yeah.
And like that is one of the big ones.
Yeah, I love that. I love that they pulled the "you failed" thing perfectly. Oh man, I almost feel like we shouldn't have shown that, but I forgot that part was there until it just happened. I'm like, yeah. No. I mean, it's been out there for like 2 weeks now because somebody leaked it. Thanks a lot. God. And I like his attitude. His attitude is just, it's very arrogant. He's clearly, I don't know if threatened is, he doesn't seem threatened at all by Kratos. He's trying to get Kratos to be Kratos, be the god of war. And that's the whole point of the battle.
There's that stun trigger with the health stone.
And now we are on the third phase.
Yeah, we're going on to the second to last phase, I believe.
I think this is the end. I don't know. I'll know in about a second.
It's the last arena. But I think there's 2 parts to this arena.
Got it. This happens, by the way, the first 2 hours of the game? This fight is very early. Yeah.
Yep.
And I loved reading the comments. The commenters are all wrong. They all thought things happened in this fight that do not happen. And I like that. I think we will cut it before the ending, just so you can see what happens for yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah. Yeah, you're doing great, Jada. I definitely would have had a few resets, and I did the first time I played through it. So I'm very impressed. I hope the viewers are also.
Just it's a lot of like I said, this is now like, yes, it's still early, so it's a little tough, but the fact that I kind of know what to expect because I've encountered tougher things later on.
Oh yeah.
Like I know the timing.
Yeah, so you go back and you're like, I think I feel pretty confident. Oh, those L1 hits! I can't believe you're hitting them. What was I gonna say? Yeah, I think one of the things that I'll put on the questions, because spoiler warnings, we're actually recording this before the interviews happen. I want to ask them, the Thor design. Was there any sort of worry about the Avengers Thor? And because Thor's been really popular in recent years, and they just went with their own look, their own characterization of Thor from Norse mythology, and I really like what they did with him. Like, probably one of my favorite enemies in the game thus far. Oh, better pop it, Jada. I wonder if that's intentional.
The damage?
Yeah, the
Goodness,
damage, because the whole point is he wants you to do this, right? He wants to see the God of War. Oh, it's so scary every time he jumps in at you. And there was that stun, and there's the significant chunk of health. And I think you are set up for a W. I really like how he fights. Was that a runic attack?
Nope, just a charged triangle.
Nice.
Ooh.
Ooh.
Ugh.
That could be bad.
There we go.
Nice.
All right, so this is the final part. So
Yeah. I will cut it before spoilers. Anyway, yeah, Jada, that was awesome. You only had one reset.
Yeah, and it was the first one, so like I had a continuous health bar all the way through, which is what I wanted to do because like dying in the middle checkpoints, it refills your health, and it takes a little air out of the sails. It's like, yeah, I did this on God of War, but doing it with one continuous health bar makes me feel good about my gameplay. So I hope everybody else out there enjoys it too.
Awesome. Well, mad props. You're part of Beyond. When does Beyond air?
We air Tuesdays now. Episode usually goes live between 2 and 3 p.m. on YouTube, IGN.com, and we also have it on Stitcher and everywhere else you find your podcasts.
Great. Well, that was a super long look at combat on the hardest difficulty. And now we're going to talk to both of the lead combat designers. Take it away back in the studio.
If you're just joining us, this is our Day 0 live stream of God of War Ragnarok, and we are joined now by lead combat designers Mihir and Denny from Sony Santa Monica. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good. Excited to be here.
Yeah, doing great.
Well, it's great to have you. To start out, why don't you tell us a little bit about what went into improving the combat of God of War Ragnarok when God of War 2018 already had great combat?
Yeah, so right after God of War 2018 on the development team, we were asking ourselves the same question. We're like, what are we going to do? Right? Great, we made this game. We're really happy with it, very proud of it. But like, oh boy, what are we signing up for now? And I think there's two areas that we really focused on from the very beginning. A lot more happened, but the two things from the very beginning, the first one is just expanding player expression, right? Which is a term that gets thrown around a lot. And I think for us, we really take that to heart in meaning we want to expand player choice and kind of have more in the game that you can engage with, right? We're not planning on just like throwing out the combat and like doing something new. It's like, no, let's build upon what we have. Let's kind of showcase the things in combat a little bit more that maybe, you as a player, you only would engage in like 10% of the system. Let's try to increase that number. Let's try to pull you into more things, put a little of yourself into that combat as you play. And I mean, we built upon that, and without going into spoiler territory, we're excited to see how players, experiment with all they have. And then Denny, you can probably answer the second one.
Yeah, also just to tie into that, right? Like the other end of player expression is just giving you the room to express yourself from the other side, which is the enemies that are attacking you, right? So this time around, we put a lot of emphasis on just making sure that there was enough variety in all the activities that you're doing, right? Whether it be the amount of enemy types that you're fighting, the amount of like different bosses, mini bosses that you're fighting, and also down to like even just the encounter types, right? The arenas that you're fighting in. So a big push this time around was we wanted to make sure that there's a lot of basically like every time you enter a combat space, right, you should ideally feel like there's something new about it. There's something that you need to figure out. Something that is just fresh. So like we added a lot more verticality into the spaces, right? There's spaces where you can grapple with your chain blades, jump in and like smash an enemy in the face downward, which wasn't something that you could do on God of War 2018. And then also just to build on that's just another tool in our arsenal, right? We also have arenas that are similar to God of War 2018, where it's a bit more like a classic like flat space arena where you're fighting more just like basic types of enemies. We might have arenas that are much more claustrophobic, where you might be fighting like a larger enemy. We might have like huge open arenas where you're fighting swarms of enemies. It all goes toward just making sure that at every step of the way, You're always feeling like there's something new, there's something surprising. And all of these different challenges that we throw at you, it's all about really like, how do we really encourage the player to make full use of their arsenal? Like Mihir was saying, there's a lot of player expression that we try to build on, but really from the encounter side, like the encounter design, we're really trying to push that by making sure that there's always a place to shine for every part of your combat, right? You might have an encounter where enemies are swarming and you want to use your chain blades to be like smashing them all at the same time, or there might be another encounter where you're fighting like a fiery enemy, and then you might want to use your frost to frost them up to get the advantage. It's really like we want to make sure that from all aspects we're trying our best to just keep the player, on their toes, always experiencing something new, and always just enjoying themselves, discovering new things about both themselves as players and also just the game in general.
It's pretty. I've played a lot of Ragnarok already, just FYI, and it's pretty common for you to just be surrounded by enemies on all sides. One of the cues you have to give feedback to the player is Mimir. Mimir will, say, bind your brother or whatever. When you were designing the combat, did you find that was almost necessary for the player? Because I feel like the camera's maybe a little bit closer to your character than in some other action games. Was that like necessary to provide that feedback for the player?
Yeah, I think this is, we're building on the cameras that we had in God of War 2018, and it was so integral to the new direction of the franchise that I think in trying to figure this all out, one of the most important things about God of War as a combat system is feeling confident in your tools, right? So when we say that, we need players to kind of be comfortable in their surroundings, and that's how they can engage in more offensive behavior, right? Like, we want you to dive in, we want you to play with your, we say play with your food, and I think adapting to that with the closer camera requires more opportunities for inputs. So as you said, Mimir saying things, we have the UI indicators on screen to let you know, but there's a lot of work that actually goes into the enemy AI as well to kind of position in a way that is kind of predictable. Like, there's something that happens in players that they don't know what's going on, but kind of they have a mental map in their head of what might be happening. And part of the fun of God of War combat is once when you're confident in your mental map, and it's like, I got these tools, this is how I want to execute my plan, I'm going to go for it, and hopefully do something that's exciting and worthy of Kratos as the God of War.
Yeah, and this ties a lot to like the different types of arenas that we've added too. Is like, in some spaces you generally want to like be managing some smaller amount of enemies. Some of these bigger open spaces, there might be more enemies spread out, and there's more opportunity for you to be like jumping around, being more mobile, right? So like from a moment to moment standpoint, you might see like there's a ranged enemy across a gap, and then there's a melee enemy coming at you. Perfectly valid decision would be to just grapple across the gap, leave that melee enemy behind, and the dispatch of the ranged person before you turn around, right? There's a little bit more decision making in terms of like, I could decide to just keep running, being mobile, trying to dispatch enemies like really quickly, or I could stand my ground, deal with like making sure that I know where every enemy is, and just kind of like weather the storm like that. It's all about really like how you want to play as a player, and also all the different encounters really like encourage these different styles, and there's some cases where you might want to use one style over the other.
So you have a spread of difficulty levels from Give Me a Story on the easier side all the way up to Give Me God of War for players who are really looking for a challenge. Do you have to factor in input latency to the combat design, especially on the harder difficulties?
So when we kind of look at our difficulties, the way that we think about it is that they're serving different player types, right? And so at the highest end of the spectrum with Give Me God of War, what we're aiming to do is kind of punish mistakes, but reward opportunities and mastery of the system. And even at the level of, let's say, Give Me a Story on the other side, it's really about like, how can we get players to enjoy combat even if they don't come here for the combat, right? Like, maybe that might not be the driving factor. So when we are looking at the design, we're really just like factoring that all in. There's a lot of knobs that we look at. I'll let Denny kind of get into that a little bit, but like, ultimately what we want is that no matter which difficulty mode you're playing, for the type of player that you are, you're having fun with the combat that's there.
Yeah, and based on difficulty, right, there's a lot of different adjustments that happen behind the scenes that makes it so that it's either easier or harder to manage crowds. Like, for example, give me God of War, hardest difficulty, enemies will generally attack you very aggressively, because on that difficulty, we expect you as a player to be able to use your tools to alleviate that, right? Whereas on some of the easier difficulties, enemies might take it a little bit easier. It's not, maybe like less enemies will be attacking you at the same time. And also just like to touch upon like the player expression standpoint, based on what you want to do as a player, you could be basically like changing up the way you play. Like, for example, the 2 different shields that we have. There's more shields, but the 2 that we're talking about is the Stonewall shield and the Dauntless shield. If you're the type of player that loves that Twitch gameplay, use the Dauntless shield, do a parry at the very last moment, and you can kind of like go to town, stun an enemy, and dispatch them really quickly. Whereas if you're the type of player that maybe doesn't enjoy as much of like the reflexive aspect of the game, you can equip that Stonewall shield, be more like a tank, just be take it slower, be more of like a methodical type of player. It's really about trying to embrace like all the different types of players and making sure that players of all different play styles, players of all different skill levels are enjoying themselves. And that's why we have we added the 5th difficulty level, which is Give Me Grace, which is between Give Me Balance and Give Me Story, because on God of War 2018, we saw that for some people, right, Give Me Balance was a little bit too hard, but also Give Me Story didn't challenge them enough. So we want to make sure that no matter what your skill level is, there's always a difficulty level for you. And we want to make sure that no matter what difficulty level you're choosing, you ideally are enjoying the combat for the same reasons that like Mihir and I enjoy the combat, right? It's not enough to just make the game easy and just let you like breeze through it. It's more about like making sure that no matter what difficulty you're on, you're appreciating all the different the different options that we gave you. You still have the ability to express yourself, whether you're on Give Me God of War or Give Me Story.
Interesting. So we spoke with Bruno Velasquez from the animation team, who said you work closely to ensure animation timing syncs up with combat timing. Could you tell us a bit more about how that collaboration works?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's definitely the bread and butter of combat is both the design and the animation and some of the other gameplay teams like engineering. But yeah, combat designers work super closely with animators. In fact, at the studio, we would be at each other's desks, collaborating, finding resources, acting things out. But we've had to adapt during God of War Ragnarok to a development cycle where we're working from home for many years on this project with everything going on in the world. And so trying to retain that relationship, I think, is at the core, right? Having designers get on a call with an animator, look at something in game, adjust something back and forth. The feel of God of War combat really, lies on this partnership of these teams. Yeah, definitely was a new challenge we had to adapt to in a remote environment, and I think we're happy with where it ended up.
Yeah, and I think one really important thing from a design side is just that the design can be driven from anywhere, right? So when we're working with animation, right, oftentimes we'll have, as combat designers, we're frame nerds. We would be like, oh, we want this attack to be like 25 telegraphs before it hit, 25 frames of telegraph before it hits you or whatever. But also sometimes we'll just see like animators will animate something and we'll be like, that just looks amazing. We're gonna find a way to make that work in the combat. And sometimes that's the way it goes, right? And this can happen from any department. We might see some amazing VFX, some audio or whatever, and we try to incorporate all those aspects and make it work from a combat standpoint, right? And there's a lot of minutia that goes into like the frame timings and everything about the combat. But really, I think it's all about just all the different departments coming together as a whole to really nail this experience, both from a visual standpoint, audio standpoint, gameplay tuning standpoint.
What, if any, inspiration did you take from the older God of War games pre-2018, or even other video games out there?
Yeah, I think we want to respect the history and legacy of the franchise. I mean, we're fans of the games we make, right? And even amongst ourselves, we're constantly having that discussion. So one of the things in this game that was a different change from God of War 2018 is that you almost from the beginning, you have the Blades of Chaos. And just bringing that back as a central part of Kratos' character from close to the beginning of the game was something that we were like, we can use this to kind of celebrate some of the franchise. And so we've done a whole new pass on what we call the stun grabs or the R3 animations. that you can do in the game, and you'll see some of like classic Kratos, blades animations come back out again. We kept them short and punchy and kind of exciting in the heat of combat. But I think like it's both a celebration of the character as well as taking the character of Kratos through this whole journey and setting up, like where is he now, right? And one thing we always like to talk about is, Kratos is a Spartan general. I mean, apart from just strength, he's also kind of a tactical genius, right? Like he's been in so many fights throughout his life, he's been in so many different scenarios, that I think we try to embrace that in this game in a way that was really exciting to do for fans of the franchise leading up to now, newcomers alike. Hopefully, people play this game, they're like, I want to know more about this character. Maybe I didn't know about this character, but something's interesting. He's got a style, he's got this legacy, and we definitely really try to respect that.
Denny, anything from the older games that you brought to the table?
It's mostly a lot of what Mihir said, right? We definitely, since we wanted to build upon the foundation of God of War 2018, right? On God of War 2018, we spent a lot of time just figuring out what the game was, right? Because it was a huge reinvention. We had to figure out the new closer camera. We had to figure out a lot of things that were charting like very new ground. Whereas this game, we have this foundation already available. And really, it was about like, how do we take this to the next level, and how do we really build upon the strengths, patch the weaknesses, and really deliver basically what would be just like the next evolution of basically this new style of God of War, right? And I think really it was really fun to work on, because as designers, right, it gives us a lot of freedom to just really try a lot of different things and just see what resonates. And I think as a result, there's just a lot of like little adjustments that have been made to combat, to basically every part of the game that hopefully will make it feel like even more of a complete experience than God of War 2018.
Like 2018, there's a lot of fun, finishing kill animations. Do you each have a personal favorite?
Oh man, I've seen so many of them. Like I said earlier, I actually really like the new blades finishers that we have in this game. On God of War 2018, we weren't able to kind of show players a lot of these finishers with the blades, and I think this time kind of revisiting some of them, especially some like we have an internal name for it, but I don't know what the actual name we would say. But basically, anytime he gets to pull the chains out, grab an enemy, throw them into the air, slam them down. Some of these classic callbacks, but with a twist. I think anytime we're able to do that, it's just like, I don't know, when people on the development team are giddy seeing something, that's kind of like a good sign. Like when someone in the studio is like, oh my god, I saw that looked awesome, you're like, okay, like this is probably gonna land pretty well.
Yeah, I gotta echo that same sentiment. Is just the new weapon-based kills, right? Like when Kratos takes out the blades and then you press R3 and he like wraps the blades around and like decapitates them all. I think all that stuff where we didn't really do as much of that on the last game is just, I think it's really fresh to see. It's just really satisfying.
I agree with that. Very satisfying. Mihir, Denny, thank you so much for joining us. That is all the God of War Ragnarok we have time for today. I want to thank our friends from Sony Santa Monica for stopping by to chat, and thank you all for watching. For more on all things God of War, stick with us right here at IGN.